Welcome to the Yahuwah Triangle Virtual Conference, hosted by Rob Skiba. Coming up next,
Mythology and the Coming Great Deception.
Now, here's your host, Rob Skiba.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's always nice having a live audience to talk to. Even though I can't see you, I know you're there. So this talk tonight will be called Mythology and the Coming Great Deception. And let me get my screen share ready for you again, and we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. This particular talk is called Mythology and the Coming Great Deception, and it is based on the content in the original presentation that I did back in, I want to say it was December 2011, maybe it was early, it might have even been January 2012, but it's been a few years. So, after I went back and looked at that content, I thought, you know what, I really do need to update that and make it really kind of gel more in line with the topics in the Yahuwah Triangle series, from the Yahuwah Triangle Part 1, which is about the Great Pyramid and Egypt, and Yahuwah Triangle Part 2, which is about finding the Garden of Eden, and Part 3, Babylon and the Commandments of Eden, and how the triangle and how it all works. Those are the 3 points in the triangle, right? We've talked about that before. And then, after I did Part 3 of the Yahuwah Triangle, we have the Babylon Rising presentation, which is also updated and based on content from my book, Babylon Rising. And I think it was either last year or early this year, I forget now, but I decided to do an updated and expanded edition of Babylon Rising. And when I did that, I added probably close to 50 pages of new content and updated some of the other content that was in it. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to bring that into the presentation that we're doing right now, Mythology and the Coming Great Deception, specifically the content dealing with NASA. And I'm also bringing in some content from these two presentations right here, Archon Invasion, The Return of the Nephilim, Part 1 and Part 2. So you're going to kind of get a whole lot of things tonight. And when I usually begin this presentation, I start with this slide right here. I say, what do these movies have in common? And the audience usually gives me a variety of answers. But what I'm really looking for is this one right here. Here's what these three movies actually have in common. The Son of God saves the world. That's the theme of all three movies. Of course, the problem is, it's the wrong son of the wrong God, right? We have Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief there. We have the son of Poseidon, Clash of the Titans, son of Zeus, and of course, Thor, son of Odin. Son of God saves the world. The problem is, wrong son, wrong God. And that caused me to think of, when we look in the Torah, when we look in the Bible, we see the 10 Commandments, right? It begins with, thou shalt have no other gods before me. I've seen that, growing up, of course, we're all familiar with the 10 Commandments. But I never really spent a lot of time thinking about, wait a minute, who are these other gods and why is Yahuwah so concerned about them? Are they real? I'm going to suggest to you that they are real. And that's why he said, don't put them before him. And right around the time when I was first looking into all this stuff, I stumbled across this little book right here by a friend of mine on Facebook, King Wells. I say friend, but we have a variety of disagreements, but it's all good. We can have discussion. But I really loved his book, and I always try to endorse it any time I get an opportunity to when I'm talking about this subject, because it's a short book, but it's very well written. And in this book, King Wells makes a statement here. He says, I believe the Bible to be the inerrant word of God, and therefore we have to believe that much of what we call myth cannot be fiction or a lie. Many of the themes that exist in ancient mythology exist in the scriptures, and he's right. And he suggests in the book that we should view the Bible from a mythological worldview. And at first it sounds kind of weird to say that, look at the Bible from a mythological worldview, because we are all taught, and I believe this is true, and so does King, that we should, look at things from a biblical worldview. But what he's saying is that the authors of the scriptures lived in a time where their context was the Sumerian, Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek, Roman gods. I mean, think about it. They thought Paul was Mercury, right? The messenger of the gods, because he was a spokesperson, right? And Barnabas was Zeus, you know? I mean, that should tell you something. They looked at the attributes of these two guys when they were out and about doing their thing, talking to the Gentiles, and they thought, well, he's the messenger of the God. He must be Mercury. I mean, let that sink in. That at the time, the writers of our scriptures, when they were writing, the people that in the context, in the environments that they were in, they didn't think of this stuff as mythology. In fact, I have a friend of mine that grew up in Greece, in modern times. He grew up in Greece as a kid, and whenever he heard me talking about some of this stuff, and as we got into conversations about the Greek myths, he corrected me. He said, "Wait a minute, you keep calling this mythology." He says, "But I have to tell you something." He said, growing up in the public school system in Greece, we were not taught this stuff as myth. We were taught this stuff as our history. And, I mean, that's in modern times, he was taught that. And so, it really caused me to think about this stuff and say, what if these guys were real? And if they were, who were they? Where did they come from? What's the deal with these guys? And that was the beginning of my quest to really reconcile some things in my mind growing up. Some of you have heard me talk about this before, but frankly, the Old Testament used to freak me out. I mean, it used to really tweak me out. Because in the New Testament, you have Jesus as this loving guy, right? He's hanging out with publicans and sinners. He's not judging people. He's loving on people. And, he's healing the sick and casting out demons. This amazing guy. But he keeps saying stuff like, I and my Father are one. And he says to Philip, Philip says, well, show us the Father and it'll be sufficient. And Jesus says, well, Philip, what are you talking about? You've been with me all this time. You're asking me this? Philip, if you've seen me, you've seen my Father. And that just never computed in my head, because Jesus is a loving guy, and then the Old Testament, you flip through the Old Testament, it's like, kill the women, kill the children, kill the animals, wipe out everything. It seemed like the God of the quote unquote God of the Old Testament was a scary genocidal maniac. There's a few stories I could deal with in the Old Testament that we were taught in Sunday school and stuff, but other than that, I mean, it really tweaked me out. I remember I actually desired to create a notebook and just start with Genesis 1, and anything I had a question or a comment that I wanted to make about whatever it was that I was reading, I would put it in this sort of a journal. And I didn't get too far through the Old Testament when I finally, you could tell my frustration. I'm looking at my notes and I'm like, why is he saying this? Why is he doing this? What is going on here? And it just flipped me out. Finally, I just, I'm a New Testament Bible believing Christian, and I'm not going to deal with that stuff anymore. It was really this study that I'm doing for you guys. This is the first one I ever did on the public scene. First time I ever made sort of a public entrance talking about any of the materials that I've since become known for. This was my first one. And it was during this study that a lot of things got healed, if you will, in my heart and in my mind and my spirit regarding the scriptures. And I just, I want to thank people like King Wells for putting this seed in my head to look at the Bible from a mythological worldview, in the sense of considering the fact that when these guys wrote, there was some pretty wild stuff going on dealing with the gods of what we now call mythology. And it really all goes back to what many have referred to as the seed war, a seed war that began in Genesis chapter 3. We see in Genesis 3:13 through 15, the woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." So the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Well, first of all, you got to, wait a minute, your offspring? What's this, offspring of the serpent? What's going on here? And, if you're the serpent receiving this prophecy that her seed's going to crush your head, what do you think you're going to do? What's your reaction going to be? Getting your head crushed is a bad thing, right? Yeah. So the first thing we see is Cain kills Abel, right? the bad guy kills the good guy. The one who had a predisposition, I guess, for listening to the voice of evil killed the one who would be considered the good guy. And then Adam and Eve have another child, right? Seth. And I don't believe Cain was able to get to Seth or anybody else. So what happens next? You turn the page and you get Genesis chapter 6, right? In Genesis chapter 6, we have what I've come to refer to as the Genesis 6 experiment. And that took place in the crosshairs right here of this picture, which is just north of the Yahuwah Triangle, incidentally. An individual by the name of David Flynn was, I think, one of the first people to write about this, talked about the fact that Mount Hermon, which is where the Genesis 6 experiment took place, we'll cover that a little bit more in a minute, but that's where the angels came down in Genesis 6 and mated with women. That happens to be located at 33.33 degrees north by 33.33 degrees east from the Paris prime meridian. Now, if you go on Google Earth, you can check this out for yourself, find kind of the center area of the mountain range, and it's like 35.54, I believe, but that's from the Greenwich, the current prime meridian. But if you subtract the difference between the current prime meridian and the Paris prime meridian from 35.54, you end up with 33.33. He also noticed that, well, it's 2012 nautical miles from that location to the Paris prime meridian and 2012 nautical miles to the equator, which caused a lot of people to go, regarding the year 2012. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later on, or I can answer some questions if you have any questions about 2012 and what I think took place in that scenario. So this is where we know that Lucifer took 1/3 of the angels with him, right? And I always ask the question, well, what's 1/3 of 100? 33.3333333%, right? Well, isn't it just is it just a coincidence, or is it just really amazing that a platoon of about 200 Watcher class angels landed on the only geographical landmass location on the planet that fits their number to a T, 33.33 by 33.33. You'll notice that there is another crosshair, so to speak, down there in the southern part of Africa, between Africa and Madagascar, but that lands you in the ocean. So it's the only spot. Now, of course, this is in post-flood scenario. So, okay, you might say in the pre-flood world, maybe Madagascar was connected, looks like it was, to the southern portion of Africa there. Fair enough. But all the ancient records talk about it happening at Mount Hermon. This is Mount Hermon today. This is where the Genesis 6 experiment took place. Genesis 6:4 talks about Nephilim were in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same were the mighty men that were of old, men of renown. So keep that in the back of your mind right there. There's a lot going on there. We see in what I call the synchronized, biblically endorsed extra biblical text of Enoch that it was 200 watchers who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders. And I'm not going to read them there. You can see for yourself a bunch of strange names right there. These are the chiefs of tens. These are the archons. A lot of people wonder, why did I name my book and the DVDs Archon Invasion? Well, it's just a Greek word. Archon means chief, commander, leader with authority. That's all it means. And now the New Agers and the Gnostics, they've kind of stolen that word for themselves and come up with all kinds of meanings about ascended masters and whatnot, which, you know, is probably true too. But we're dealing with principalities and powers, spiritual wickedness in high places. These are the leaders. But the word itself, archon, it could be applied to anybody who's in a position of leadership and authority. These are the named archons. These are the leaders of the 200 Watcher class angels right here. And that's synchronized with Genesis right to the same chapter number even, 1 Enoch chapter 6. These are what some people in the secular world, I believe, are calling ancient aliens. Have you guys ever seen this series, Ancient Aliens? You know, one of the other reasons why I started doing this type of research is because a friend of mine had just graduated from Bible college, and he had seen season 1 of Ancient Aliens, and he was actually planning on starting his own Bible school. And after seeing season 1 of Ancient Aliens, he was pretty shook up. And I don't want to say that it shook up his faith. You know, his faith was still intact and still solid. But, you know, he calls me up. He's like, Rob, you know, I know you do all this kind of weird stuff, weird research. You like looking into this stuff. What do we do with the evidence? I mean, we can disagree with their conclusions, but what do we do with the evidence? We can't just ignore it. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, here's a guy who just graduated from Bible college, and I guarantee you that he wasn't getting any of this teaching because, unfortunately, seminaries today teach what's called the Sethite theory, that the sons of God of Genesis 6 are the good sons of Seth mating with the bad daughters of Cain. And I simply say, well, first of all, the text doesn't say that. Second of all, sons of God is a reference to angels later on, like in the book of Job, which many would say predates Genesis anyway. So, and if that's the case, if Job predates Genesis, then the law of first use applies, that we're talking about angels in this case. Third, kissing cousins do not produce the giants that we later read about in the scriptures. If it's just the good sons of Seth mating with the bad daughters of Cain, and first of all, why is it that the good guys are doing the bad thing in the story? If it's just kissing cousins, how do you get Og of Bashan 15, 18 feet tall, or Goliath 9 to 12 feet tall, or the Amorites as tall as cedar trees, Amos 2:9? It doesn't work. The ancient record is in unanimous agreement. Unanimously, they all agree the angels came down and mated with women. It's not till you get to about 200 AD with a guy named Julius Africanus who shows up and says, I don't believe that, and made up this bogus theory called the Sethite theory that later Calvin and others thought, hey, that's cool, kind of cool, we like that. And next thing you know, that's what's being taught in seminary. So that's what your pastor is taught, and that's why your pastor thinks you're crazy when you try to bring up the stuff that you heard from that lunatic Rob Skiba or other people like me that talk about this stuff. But look, it goes back to Genesis 6, angels who, for all intents and purposes, we could consider aliens. Not aliens in the sense of from Arcturus or from the Pleiades or Orion or whatever, but entities that left their former estate, as scripture says, and came here. They were foreigners. They were aliens. They weren't supposed to be here doing what they did. They do have a function, but that's not one of the functions. They were prohibited from cohabitating with human women. One of the things I noticed, though, as I'm looking into this, I'm thinking, well, find a need and fill it. There's a pretty huge need within the body of Christ to be talking about this stuff. So that was, again, one of those early seeds planted in me that caused me to dive into this stuff. And I watched the Ancient Aliens series, and I kind of enjoy it, if for no other reason than to laugh at some of the crazy theories these guys come up with. And sometimes it frustrates me and I'm yelling at the screen and stuff. But I've noticed that the Ancient Aliens crowd love to quote from this book right here. The Ancient Aliens, this screenshot was actually taken from an episode of Ancient Aliens. And I was able to speak at a secular UFO conference in New Jersey with some of the guys from the Ancient Aliens show. Not the guy with the big hair, or Eric Von Daniken either, but some of the other guys. And, we had some interesting conversations, but they quote from this book. So when I was there, I thought, you know what? I'm gonna use their own language, so to speak. I'm gonna talk on their level. And they always talk about ancient alien theorists believe. And so I started referring to myself and others like me as ancient Nephilim theorists believe. Us ancient Nephilim theorists, we believe such and such. And I took some clips from their own show, Ancient Aliens, and edited it together to sort of make a point. And this is what I showed them at the conference.
Highly advanced humans, living thousands of years ago. Unidentified DNA in the human genome. And ancient chronicles describing heavenly interventions on Earth. Demonic seduction.
You cannot resist or do anything about it.
Hybrid offspring.
People believe that he was half dragon and half human.
And strange abductions.
These beings from outer space wanted to have sex.
In cultures throughout the world, there are tales of intimate encounters with extraterrestrial beings. But could these stories be more than just myth?
we should finally come to grips with the idea that extraterrestrials had something to do with our development.
Clearly, there are entities out there which have an agenda, mating with human beings for their own purpose. Millions of people around the world believe we have been visited in the past by extraterrestrial beings. Did ancient aliens really help to shape our history? And if so, might we be the product of alien breeders?
An anthropologist from the University of Wisconsin, Dr. John Hawkes, did a comprehensive analysis of human DNA going back for many thousands of years, and what he found was astonishing. If you look at the DNA from someone in 3000 BC, and you compare that to the DNA of someone alive today, it has changed by 7%.
Mapping the human genome, Dr. Hawkes found that in the past 5,000 years, our DNA has evolved at a rate 100 times greater than any previous 5,000-year period in our history.
So what happened in the last 5,000 years that altered the structure of human DNA by 7%?
Throughout world cultures and mythologies, this idea of otherworldly beings, gods, supernatural beings, demons, having sex with humans is very, very common. The way that we interpret that experience depends on the cultural and religious factors around us.
We can read about these accounts of all sorts of weird beings who had their way with humans.
Perhaps further evidence can be found, not by scientists, but by religious scholars. Millions of people around the world believe in the Hebrew Bible. What if it were true?
Catch the modification? Usually it says millions of people around the world believe in ancient aliens or something like that, and I took it and said millions of people around the world believe in the Hebrew Bible because it's true. Millions of people around the world do believe in the Hebrew Bible. And you know, one of the things I do like about the way that they do their documentaries, the ancient aliens, is they ask a lot of questions. They do. I mean, if you go back and watch it, yeah, they make a lot of statements too, but they always say, you know, what if such and such, or could it be that such and such? And so they do, and it's sort of a way out for them, actually, to say, well, look, all we're doing is asking questions. They're not just asking questions. They do, in fact, have an agenda that they're trying to push. But I like the technique that they have used a lot. And so I just kind of turned it around on them at the conference and said, you know what if this Hebrew Bible that you guys like to quote a lot is actually true? And if you will allow me, I would like to explore some things from the Hebrew Bible and give you my take on it. And they were very receptive. The audience was very receptive, and actually the speakers were too. I had some really great conversations with these guys. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. But did you catch what David Wilcock said? You know, he was citing the work of Dr. John Hawkes, and he notes that something happened to our DNA around 3000 BC. I wonder what it could have been. You know, I'm watching this going, wow, I mean, these guys are telling my story, or, you know, the story of the ancient Nephilim researchers. There are other guys out there who have been talking about this stuff for years, you know, and their own research is pointing them to this same time period, 3000 BC or thereabouts. And he asks, what happened at that time? Well, this is where I believe my work perfectly dovetails into that which was spoken about in one particular episode of the Ancient Aliens called Alien Breeders. I forget what season that was, 5 or 6, I believe. But you can look that one up, Alien Breeders, because they might as well have been talking straight out of our ancient Nephilim theorist playbook. Well, let's go back and look at what was going on in 3000 BC. This was a chart that I had done a long time ago regarding the pre-flood timeline. And when I believe the Genesis 6 experiment took place, if we look at the chronology given to us in Genesis, you know, so-and-so begat so-and-so, and they lived so many years and died, you can put together timeline charts, and many people have. Bishop Ussher is probably one of the most famous. Dr. Ken Johnson, a lot of people that have put together charts. The Adams Wall chart of world history is actually a great resource. It's one that I really enjoy, though I found some discrepancies in it. And, you know, all of us are doing the best we can with the information that we have. So, and as Paul said, we're all looking through a glass dimly. So even with my timeline charts, which I've made available to people, look, this is just from my research, it's the best conclusion that I can come to. You may come to different conclusions, but you know, within probably 50 to 100 years, most of these charts that I've looked at anyway are, you know, pretty close to in agreement with each other. And so, you know, based on the works of others as well as my own trek through the scriptures, this is a timeline that I put together. And like I always say, don't believe a thing I say. Take it and go look it up for yourself. I'm just a student like everybody else here, and you know, I have what I consider to be strong and well-informed opinions, but that's all it is. It's just my opinion. So take it or leave it. I know a lot of people want to argue. I'm like, look, I'm just looking into this stuff. You guys look into it for yourself. I believe 3550 BC is when the Genesis 6 experiment took place. Now, the book of Enoch tells you that the first generation Nephilim that Josephus likened unto the Titans of Greek mythology only would live for 500 years. And within that 500-year time period, they would kill each other off in a massive civil war that I believe the Greeks much later stylized into what became known as the Clash of the Titans. Okay, so you have the first generation Nephilim Titans right here, up in the top here, 365 years of Enoch's life. Enoch's born right in here during this chaos, the Clash of the Titans. And then if you get close to this 3000 time period right here, well, you see the Mayan calendar shows up at 3114 BC. It kind of makes you wonder, did they know something was coming? Did they start trying to put something in stone? Shortly after that, about 25 years or so, you have the death of Adam, and then you have the end of the 500 years of the first generation Nephilim, the end of the Clash of the Titans. And then about 60 years or so later, you have Enoch gets raptured, and here you are. You're in this 3000 BC time frame. And that's when they believe that ancient aliens may have had something to do with the corruption of our DNA. And those of us who study the scriptures say, well, you're close. It was angels. Now, of course, they don't subscribe to that view.
The whole idea or concept of Satan is based on a misunderstood visit by extraterrestrials in the remote past. According to the ancient astronaut theory, the reason why we have the idea of a Satan today is because there might have been some type of a mutiny between good and bad extraterrestrial factions in the remote past. And so the mutineers were cast out by the commander, and they became known as the evil, fallen angels, which they never were.
Which they never were. Yeah. Okay, let me just ask you a question. Would you go to this guy for brain surgery? No, of course not. This guy's an auto mechanic. Why would you go to an auto mechanic for brain surgery? Just like, why would you listen to this guy to try to explain what was going on in the ancient world that all the ancient texts talk about? You know, his whole thing is like, and Von Daniken too. I've got another clip where these guys are talking about, look, if you just change the word angels to extraterrestrials, well, you have a completely different story. Well, yeah, of course you do. You have a completely different story apart from the one that you're trying to quote. You know, I'm like, guys, let's just let the text tell us what it says. Let's not change the text to make it say what we want it to say. That's not really legitimate research. That's not being intellectually honest with the text. The text says angels. Okay. And of course, when we look into the text, we see that angels took on other forms and they started mating with women and doing all kinds of stuff, changing their forms and whatnot. We see that the Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God, the angels, went to the daughters of humans and they had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So you have this origin of the gods, the heroes of old, and this is where I differ with a number of my ancient Nephilim researcher buddies who think that and also after that is a reference to the post-flood world, and it's not within the scope of this talk to really unpack that. If you want to see more on that, see my Archon Invasion book or part 1 of the DVD that goes along with it. I contend that the text is telling you in multiple places that Genesis 6 is entirely in a pre-flood context. And in my opinion, the word of old right there in English, old, comes from the Hebrew word olam. And that word is translated 136 times in your Bible as forever, 110 times as everlasting, or the other way around. I always get those mixed up. But at any rate, it's translated a whole bunch of times for to indicate a very long time ago. It's not a word that Moses would have used to describe the Anakim, the sons of Anak that they just saw last week when they sent the spies into the land 850 years after the flood. It's not a word you say, these were the ones that became, the giants that we just saw in Canaan. He's saying these same ones that we're talking about in Genesis 6, 1-4 are the ones who became the heroes of Olam, of the very, very ancient past. So these heroes of the very ancient past, or what Josephus likens unto the Titans, and that's your Kronos type characters, Saturn type characters, and possibly even Zeus and Jupiter. I still kind of vary as to whether Zeus and those guys were pre or post flood. There's some good evidence that they were post flood. So, I mean, you can kind of look into it and try to figure it out for yourself, but I'm still on the fence on that one. But anyway, I think this explains the origin of the pre-flood gods of the ancient world and myths that go along with them. They were carried forward, of course, through the occupants on the ark. I mean, you have to realize that Shem, Ham, and Japheth lived for almost 100 years in the pre-flood world. They were thoroughly exposed to everything that was going on in the pre-flood world for close to 100 years. I think Shem was like 98. So, you got to know that when they started having kids, they would have talked about some of the things that they had seen before the flood. I mean, talk about the campfire stories that they could have had as a family together, describing the way things were and what it was like on the ark for almost a year and what it was like immediately getting off the ark, So it's easy to see how stories could have carried forward from the pre-flood world into the post-flood world. But when we get into the post-flood world, I think we have some interesting things to look at regarding the origin of the post-flood gods. And I would point to this book right here, Ancient Post-Flood History by Dr. Ken Johnson. This is another short book, but full of really good stuff. I highly recommend it. And he points out in the book the longevity of the people, both before and after the flood, but specifically talking about after the flood, noting that Noah lived to be 950 years total. He was 600 at the time of the flood, and he lived 350 years after the flood. Okay. And his sons, they lived to close to 600 years of age. The next generation lived between 400 and 500 years of age. And it's not till you get to about Abraham's generation that you see that people are in the 200-year time frame. So there's a pretty dramatic drop-off in longevity. Pre-flood world, you got Methuselah, 969 years. Post-flood world, even Noah's still 950 years, and it starts to decline. And you get to the time of Abraham, and Abraham's only about 400 years or so after the flood. So by that time, people are, living only about 200 years. But there are overlaps. These people are still overlapping. I mean, Shem lived a long time into the patriarchal age. And of course, from Moses to today, people only lived until about 120 years of age. And Psalm 90 verse 10 says, our generation is 70 years, 80th by strength. And that's true today. I mean, most people are living only to about the 80 time frame. There's some that manage to get past that, but 120, 130 tops is about where we've been since the time of Moses. So he goes on to say, we can see how several myths might develop. First, People who only live to about 200 years old would consider those living much longer to be immortals, and their parents, who apparently will never die, it should be die, not day, to be gods. But when the first 3 generations start dying off, rumors will develop about wars between the immortals and gods. After the languages changed at the Tower of Babel, the legends would have been even more confused, with a variety of different names applied to each immortal or god. So what's he saying here? It's like, okay, imagine you're in the generation that only lives to be about 200 years of age, and you're on your deathbed, man. You've reached the end of your life, and you're about to die. And you're looking at your dad, who's probably close to twice your age, and he's still looking over you as you're about to die. Well, you might be tempted to think that, your parents are immortals. They certainly are outliving you. And if your grandparents are still around and they're kicking around at about 500-600 years of age, you may be tempted to think that they are gods. And it just makes sense if you put it that way. Now let's kind of flip it. Imagine you're the one living to be close to 500-600 years of age, and those who are in the generation living only to about 200 years of age, they're all looking at you thinking you're a god. What's that going to do to your ego? Now, you're probably significantly wiser than these people, so you're going to look at them, you're going to look down on them anyway, because they can't even come close to the experience, life experience, wisdom, and understanding that you've accumulated in 500 or 600 years. They're only living about a third your lifespan. So you're already going to think they're inferior. So yeah, I can imagine how people would easily start taking advantage of their longevity, thinking and propping themselves up to be gods as others are looking up to them as gods. It just makes sense. This is known as the theory of euhemerism. It's a theory attributing the origin of the gods to the deification of historical heroes. And this is named after a guy named Euhemerus, who lived around 300 BC or so, who's a Greek philosopher who came up with this theory. And you got characters like Clement of Alexandria in agreement when he writes, "Those to whom you bow were once men like yourselves." He's making commentary saying to the pagans, the gods that you guys worship were just people. You're worshiping people. Now, to be fair, if you go back into the ancient records, some of these people weren't just your average person. This is a representation of the biblical scale of the giants that we read about in Scripture. You got a little 6-foot guy there on the left. Then you got the Og of Bashan and Goliath scale, roughly 9 to 18 feet, give or take, in there. And then you have the early Canaanite scale, and I'm referencing Amos 2:9 there. Amos 2:9, if I just take it literally, and I do believe that we should take it literally, it says that the Amorites were as tall as cedar trees and strong as the oaks. Well, a cedar tree gets to, a modest cedar tree gets to about 36 feet tall. Now, the cedars of Lebanon get to about 150 feet tall. So, and they were world famous, the cedars of Lebanon. So just erring on the small side of the cedar scale, I still think you're in about the 30-foot scale area there. So, to be fair, those to whom you bow were once men. Well, it says that they became men of renown. They were men. They were hybrid men, but they were big men who may have been living for long periods of time. I put together this timeline chart early on, showing on the top area there the time period of the flood is there and depicted in blue right here. And then you have Noah right there and his offspring Shem, and Arphaxad right here, and Selah, Eber, and Peleg, right? And showing when Cush was born also, in Nimrod. Then in this middle one right here, you have the Canaanite giants. Well, the Canaanites came from Canaan, right? And Amorius is the father of the Amorites. So, if you just kind of follow the parallel of who's showing up when, and of the Amorites, you have some famous ones that show up right around the time of the Genesis 14 war right here. The Amorites, Mamre, Aner, and Eshcol, who were actually, as far as I can tell, they were good guys. They were giants, but they were friends with Abraham and helped him out in the Genesis 14 war. So are there good Nephilim? Well, it's apparently, at least with these three guys anyway. Then you have Arba right here, Anak, and the sons of Anak right here that the Israelites encountered when they went in Numbers chapter 13. And then carrying it down here, I just kind of thought of the parallels rather interesting, because looking at the timeline of when things are taking place, Mamre, an Amorite, apparently shows up about the same time as Terah, Abraham's father. And Arba possibly shows up about the same time as Abraham shows up. Anak showing up about the same time as Isaac showing up. And the Anakim showing up about the same time as Jacob. And it was the descendants of Jacob who took out the Anakim, the sons of Anak, in Numbers 13 when they went there. And they were familiar with them. How would they be familiar with them unless they had stories through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob talking about contemporaries of each of them? Because when they got there, they said, and the sons of Anak. Well, they knew who Anak was. They had spent, and this is a generation that hadn't been to the land of Canaan. They were a generation that grew up as slaves in Egypt. But the stories obviously were being told while, from generation to generation in Egypt. They were in Egypt for, everybody says 400 years. Okay, first of all, they were not in Egypt. No one was a slave in Egypt for 400 years. I believe it's Galatians 5. Paul says, from the giving of the covenant of Abraham to the giving of the law of Moses is 430 years. So there's your guardrails. The giving of the covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15, and the giving of the covenant of Mount Sinai, with Moses, 430 years. No one is in Egypt from the time of Abraham until, other than brief sojourn back and forth, until Joseph is sold into slavery 215 years after the covenant of Abraham. And then Joseph goes down there, and the story. He's in prison for a little while, and then he gets elevated to second in command of all of Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh. Then there's the famine in the land of Canaan, and Jacob and his family come down, and the story. I mean, they're treated like princes. They're given the best of the land of Goshen. So these guys are living like regional governors in the land of Egypt for an extended period of time until a Pharaoh arose that did not remember Joseph. So at best, they were slaves in Egypt for about 100 years. Probably became slaves just prior to the birth of Moses, I would guess. At any rate, for 215 years leading up to the Exodus, generations of the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob talked about the stories of the land of Canaan that they brought with them. So they were well acquainted with who the Anakim are, sons of Anak. They knew that. So I think this chart kind of helps to put in perspective who was living when and what's going on. But I want you to notice that the Genesis 14 wars right here, that's only about 450 years after the flood. Canaanites are showing up immediately after the flood. In fact, I think Canaan was either born on the ark or right as soon as I got off of it. The book of Joshua tells you that the three sons of Noah married their wives 7 days before the flood. And that actually makes sense. If you go back and look at the pre-flood patriarchs, no one's really getting married and having kids till pretty close to 100 years of age, which if you think of the fact that they were living close to 1,000 years as the first tenth of their life, they are considered basically children at that age, at 100 years of age. And in fact, the book of Isaiah talks about in the millennial reign, somebody who dies at 100 years would be considered a child. So it makes sense that they didn't get married until right before they got on the ark. And when you consider they had a building project and had to get animals together and taken care of and all that, they're probably too busy for that marriage stuff prior to 7 days before the flood. So the wives don't show up until 7 days before the flood. They get on the ark, and immediately after the flood, you've got this character named Canaan being born. And as we'll see later, Canaan is the father of the Canaanites, who were the giants in the land, with no mention of another incursion of angels, incidentally. So I put together some timeline charts, a little bit more detailed right here, like this one. This shows the 350 post-flood years of Noah's life and the origin of the post-flood giants and things of that nature. When I was first looking into the post-flood, and well, actually pre- and post-flood gods of the ancient world, you see charts like this showing up. This is the family tree of the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian gods. And it gets pretty convoluted as you start looking at some of this stuff. And but I noticed sort of a pattern that what I call the top tier level of gods, they're like ethereal. They're like air and like water, earth, stuff like that. It's not till you get sort of into well, I guess that would be sort of the ultimate source tier is what I call them. And then you get down to top tier, and right around the top tier or the middle tier, they start taking on anamorphic attributes. They start being considered very human-like as opposed to air and water and sky and stuff like that, earth. So I tried to simplify some of the charts as I was looking at them as follows. You have the ultimate source tier gods right here. This is the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian pantheon here, top tier, middle tier, demigod, final tier on the bottom. And when I paralleled that with the Egyptian pantheon, this is what I came up with for what you see in their family tree of gods, and at least some of the bigger gods, because there are lots of them. And of course, the Greek gods that most of us are familiar with, right here, you got the Gaia and Uranus, then you have the Titans. And so it's interesting because with Gaia and Uranus, that's earth and sky, right? Or, and water, and, that's when you're in the ethereal realm. And then you have Atlas and the Titans and stuff, earthbound ones. And then, of course, you have the Olympians. And then you get down to the ones that are real famous, like the Apollo and stuff like that, characters. So when I looked at sort of this modality of rendering the family trees, and I put them together and compared them with the biblical storyline, I believe that they sort of match up like this. The top left here is the biblical one, where you see Noah and the 3 sons, and then you get down into the final demigod tier level right there with the Canaanites. And, of course, that's all talking about the people in what is known as the Table of Nations. That's Genesis chapter 10. And I go into that in a fair amount of detail in the Archon Invasion book and part 1 DVD. Now, when you look at these names, realize that, especially in biblical times, they name their kids for reasons. I mean, their names have meanings, in other words. Esau comes out red and hairy, so they named him Red and Hairy. That's what Esau means. Jacob comes out holding his heel, so they named him Heel Grabber. That's what Jacob means. And I credit this to Dr. Chuck Missler. He's the one that did. I saw something he did talking about the pre-flood patriarchs and the meaning of their names. And you see them right there, Adam through Noah. And on the right side here is what their names mean. And putting them together in the order that you see right there as a sentence, Chuck Missler said, it says, man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest. Well, that's the plan of the whole Bible right there in the names of the first 10 patriarchs. And as you start looking at the last few, well, it makes sense. He was named shall come down, or descended is another way you can look at Jared's name. That's the time when the Watchers came down, according to the book of Enoch. And Enoch, son of Jared, apparently his destiny was to be a teacher, because he spent most of his life talking against or teaching against the activity of the Watchers. And Methuselah, the connotation of his name, his death shall bring, is that judgment is coming, because 7 days before the flood, Methuselah died. So actually you had a wedding and a funeral on the same day. Methuselah died and the 3 sons got married 7 days before the flood. Judgment is coming. With his death comes judgment. 7 days later, boom, the windows of heaven are opened, the fountains of great deep broken up, and you got the flood, judgment. And of course, if you know that that's what's coming, then it makes sense. You end up naming your kid Despairing. And also, Lamech was born during the time of the first generation Titan Clash of the Titans. So, a lot of chaos going on there. It makes sense that you name your kid Despairing. Noah, on the other hand, was born after the first generation Nephilim Titans were killed off at the end of the 500-year time period, which was 700 years before the flood. So about 100 years later, Noah's born, and his daddy takes a deep breath and names him Rest. So very interesting. Well, I decided to take the same idea of applying looking up the names of the people in Genesis 10. And when I did that, oh boy, I found some interesting stuff. Now, Shem and Japheth, if you look up their names and their sons' names, they're pretty normal. But when you look up the names of Ham and his children, this is what you end up with. These are all the names given in Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 20. And you got people named like Terror and Anguish and Firebrand and Blades and Terror and Gnawing and Thorns and Enclosure of Wrath. I mean, whoa, what was going on with these kids that you name your kid Enclosure of Wrath? I mean, what possesses a parent to look at their newborn kid and say, Enclosure of Wrath, what do you think, honey? No, terror. I mean, look at them. I mean, seriously, why do you name your kid something like this unless there's something clearly wrong with them? And stringing their names together, just like Chuck Missler did, this is the paragraph that you end up with. All it is, take the meaning of their names, put them in the same order that they're given, and you end up with this paragraph. He raged, a black terror, double straight afflicted trafficker. Black terror, drink thou anguish, compass the chamber. Thunder, compass the smiting. He who is coming, their love, we shall rebel. A double straight firebrand travailing, affliction of water. Blades opening the moistened morsel. Forgiven ones bowing to spy. A trafficker hunting terrors, trodden downstairs, the strangers draw near. Showers of life, gnawing like thorns, they shall break loose. Double woolen enclosures of wrath. I don't know, call me crazy, but that's a pretty wild family tree you got going on there. I think something's clearly up with them, if you ask me. And in fact, I think the Bible tells you exactly where the post-flood Nephilim come from in Numbers 13:27 through 33, when it says, all the people we saw there are of great size. Yeah, they saw giants there. We saw the Nephilim there. And then parenthetically, it says the descendants of Anak, the Anakim, come from the Nephilim. Okay, and I've heard a lot of Nephilim researchers say that the Nephilim were sterile. Well, that refutes that right there. The Anakim are the sons of Anak, who himself is the son of Arba, who is an Amorite, son of Amorius, son of Canaan, son of Ham, who stepped off the ark with no mention of angels anywhere in the picture. Numbers 13, and there's one of my friends out there that's a prominent Nephilim researcher. He likes to show multiple versions of this scripture on the screen when he does his Nephilim 101 talk, showing different English translations. And while he's reading each of the different translations, he's completely missing the fact that this says they are Nephilim that came from Nephilim. They are giants that came from giants, not giants that came from angels. These are Nephilim from Nephilim. 5th grade reading level English. And we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. And there's another guy out there, Dr. Michael Heiser, who, for whatever reason, still also leans toward the multiple incursion theory that angels continue to mate with women. Although, in one of his lectures, he admits that there's really no reason to think that way.
We saw the Nephilim, ha-Nephilim there. The Anakites are from the Nephilim. This phrase, from the Nephilim, is min ha-Nephilim. You'll notice there's no yod here. You have the same word spelled two different ways. I think the reason why this is done here is because this is the way it's spelled in Genesis 6. The writer wants to link these Nephilim after the flood with the ones before the flood. And if that's the case, if the Anakim came from, in other words, were related to the Nephilim from before the flood, you don't need the continual cohabitation. You have a genetic relationship intact, so to speak.
You do indeed have a genetic relationship intact, so to speak. That genetic relationship goes directly to the sons of Noah. And I'm just going to say right here that this next scripture I'm about to put on the screen is the smoking gun that absolutely, positively obliterates any notion of another incursion. Right here, it's Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 and 19, where it says, the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Oh, why is he calling attention here? Ham was the father of Canaan. Who are the Nephilim that are consistently being wiped out? This is where you got to understand what God's doing right here. Because throughout the Old Testament, God would tell the Israelites, you know what, you could go to war with this group over here, and you can take the women and the animals and children as spoils of war. However, when you go over here, you got to kill the women, kill the children, kill the animals, wipe out everything. So at this point, you have a choice. Either God is schizophrenic and into random acts of genocide because he's apparently prejudiced or something, or there's a legitimate reason why the standard rules of war applied with this group over here, but on this group over here, you got to wipe out everything. And I'm going to submit to you based on the text itself, that everywhere you see him saying utterly destroy, those are the ites of Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 20. And if you don't believe me, just go look it up. Go look up all the times where he's throughout the Torah and the book of Joshua, where they had all these campaigns and they utterly destroyed the various ites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, etc., Amorites. Those are the ites of Genesis 10, 6 through 20 that go directly back to these three guys right here. And they are Canaanites. And right here, Moses, the same guy who wrote Genesis chapter 6, is writing 3 chapters later, Genesis chapter 9, and he says, Ham is the father of Canaan. No angels mentioned here. And then to elaborate on that, the next verse says, these 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these, the whole earth was populated. This is written about 850 years after the flood. Okay? Moses is writing this about 850 years after the flood. Same guy writing Genesis 9 wrote Genesis 6 and the phrase and also after that. So if he meant to imply in Genesis 6:4 that after that is in a post-flood context, this was the perfect time to elaborate on it and say, oh, by the way, these are the 3 sons of Noah, and the whole world was populated through them except for all those giants over there. The Anakim, they were populated by another incursion of angels. He doesn't say that. He says the whole population of the earth at 850 years after the flood at that time came from these 3 guys right there. And the Table of Nations proves it. And every single reference in the Bible to giants being utterly destroyed by the Israelites go back to these people with no mention of angels anywhere in the picture. So if you haven't figured it out, I totally and completely reject the multiple incursions idea as completely eisegetical. Eisegesis is where you insert your own ideas into the text because the text doesn't support that idea at all. When you look in the text, you see the 3 sons, Japheth, Ham, Shem. I got them listed here this way. The sons of Ham are Canaan, Mitzrayim, Put, and Cush. There are many giants listed in the line of Canaan. Who's the father of Canaan? Genesis 9:18. Ham was the father of Canaan. Okay. In Mitzrayim's line, there's 1 giant. We'll talk about that in a minute. At least 1 giant. Put, there are no giants that I'm aware of in Put's lineage. And there's 1 giant in Cush's lineage, which is Nimrod, but he wasn't born that way. And I've talked about this in other sessions, so I won't really go into that here. But he became a giant. I don't believe he was born that way. The Amorites are mentioned over 80 times in the scriptures. 80 times. Over 80 times the Amorites are mentioned. And Amos 2 tells you Amorites were as tall as cedar trees. Who was the father of the Amorites? Canaan. Who was the father of Canaan? Ham. No angel. In Mitzrayim's line, you have the Philistines. The Philistines are mentioned over 200 times in the scriptures. And we know of at least about 4 or 5 giants, right? That were among the Philistines. Goliath, his brothers, and these are characters that are born to the giant in Gash. Maybe he's an unnamed giant we don't know about. 6 fingers, 6 toes, the whole 9 yards. They come from Caphtor. Caphtor was a son of Mitzrayim. Now, what's interesting about Caphtor, and your King James gets it wrong, actually. If you compare translations of Genesis 10, where it talks about the sons of Mitzrayim, it leads you to believe that Cashluhim is the father of the Philistines. But the King James contradicts itself in Jeremiah 47:4 and Amos 9:7, 2 confirming witnesses showing that the Philistines came from Caphtor, not Cashluhim, his brother. Other translations get it right. New Living gets it right, and a few others. So the Philistines come from Caphtor, as verified in Jeremiah 47:4 and Amos 9:7. What's interesting about Caphtor is that he settled the island of Crete. Well, Crete is where all of Greek mythology, or as my friend who grew up in Greece would tell me, Greek history, originates. The Greek gods originate in Crete. Who settled Crete? Caphtor, son of Mitzrayim, son of Ham, who stepped off the ark. No mention of angels anywhere. So if you want to figure out where the great men of renown that showed up in the ancient post-flood world, who became later known as Greek gods, that's where you go. The Bible just told you exactly where they came from. And I used to think that the only evidence of giants were in the offspring of Ham, because that's all I could find in the scriptures. However, when I started looking into history, I found, nope, he's not alone. There are no giants in Shem's line, but there are some giants in Japheth's line. And you can look this up for yourself. Go look up Gog and Magog. Just Google them. You'll find that throughout the ancient historical record, they were recognized and understood to be giants. In fact, even to this day, there's a parade that takes place in the UK called the Lord Mayor Parade. Well, it's interesting. The Lord Mayor Parade was founded by King John Lackland, the signer of the Magna Carta, who, incidentally, all of our presidents, some would say all except for Martin Van Buren, but I remember reading somewhere that there is apparently a loose connection that Martin Van Buren may also be related to King John Lackland. But whatever the case, at least 43 of our 44 presidents are all related not only to each other, but to one guy, King John Lackland, which should tell you, how meaningless your votes are. Again, don't believe me, go look it up for yourself. We are all related.com, and plenty of other sources out there will tell you the same thing. So all our presidents are related to this one guy, and this one guy creates a parade that to this day, they are still honoring Nephilim giants in the streets of the UK. These are the giants Gog and Magog. And when I was a missionary and was in China in 2006, I spent some time in Singapore and Beijing and Wuhan. And during my time in China, I was privileged to go to the Great Wall of China. It's really quite an amazing sight. What an amazing experience to be there. But I came to understand that the Great Wall of China was originally apparently known as the ramparts of Gog and Magog. Now, if you see, there's me standing there, but if you see all these little dots right here on top of the wall, those are people. Okay, that shows you how big this wall is. That's a little bit overkill if you're just trying to keep out 6 foot tall invaders, and I think they're to keep out the hordes of Gog and Magog, who apparently, according to historical records, were giants. And if that's the case, then this commercial may be more true than we realize.
15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Everybody knows that. Well, did you know the Great Wall of China wasn't always so great?
What should we do?
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
I about fell out of my chair when I saw that commercial. I'm like, yes, even Geico gets it. Of course, the church is still arguing about the Sethite theory and angels mating with women. But anyway, when you look in these ancient cultures, you see depictions like this. They're in Asia too. I mean, it's not just giant depictions in the land of Canaan or the land of Egypt. They're all over the place. There's one in Asia right here. Now, it's just like the Great Wall of China. See all these little dots? These are people. Look how big that statue is. Some would say this is just made in honor of somebody with a tremendous ego. Okay, maybe. Or it could be a life-size representation made by people who are that big. And maybe these guys are later generations, are a little smaller. And all these little people look at that and say, wow, isn't that neat? What if it's representing something real that existed in the ancient past? I'm going to suggest that it does. Most scholars agree that civilization really originates in about the 32nd century BC timeframe. 3000 BC is where you start seeing a lot of megalithic structures. I'm not going to read all this, but that's where you see a lot of the ancient civilizations seem to date back, especially the megalithic ones, that people scratch their head and go, how did that get there? I don't know. It all goes back to about that 32nd century BC timeframe. Well, again, looking at the chart, here's 3000 right here, and this is roughly 3200 right here. So this is your time of the first generation and the first generation Nephilim area in that time period right there. So, and I started creating, this was a real general chart that I did right here. I started to elaborate on that chart with this one. right here, showing that you've got, here's the flood right here, and then immediately you got giants showing up right away. This is actually not right. When I first created this chart, I believe that the Tower of Babel was about 100 to 150 years after the flood. And then as I was doing kind of an updated version of this, I realized, nope, I was wrong. When I created this one here, I realized the error in that previous chart. I was saying that the Tower of Babel, being about 100 to 150 years after the flood, based on what's called the Peleg expansion, where it talks about, for it was in his day the earth was divided. Except if you look up the word Peleg, it means to split or divide, and it has the connotation of like a canal of water to be split, or with, like an earthquake or water. And Joktan, his brother, means to be made small from something bigger. And so I've kind of put this idea together. You got a violent separation by earthquake and water, and something bigger being made small. So I believe that that's when Pangea broke up. I believe Pangea, when all the continents were once connected, and I cover this in a lot more depth in the Yahuwah Triangle Part 1 talk regarding the expanding Earth theory. I believe that the Earth was originally fractured when the fountains of the Great Deep were broken. And there was some separation, of course, that allowed the water to go away from the flood. But I believe that there was a further separation that took place, that there was an additional separation, the Peleg expansion. And when it said it was in his days, Peleg's days, the earth was divided, I thought it was talking about the division of language, that it was contemporary with the division of continents. But then upon further research, I realized that's not really true. You got the Peleg expansion happening right around here. Nimrod doesn't show up until way over here. So I was off by a few hundred years regarding the Tower of Babel incident. The Tower of Babel is way over here. Peleg in his days divided, and his father naming him that, maybe because he peed his leg when the earth starts shaking or something, I don't know. So I was wrong there. And then when I kind of zeroed in a little bit more into the Nimrod-Abraham timeline, you start seeing where there's I believe in many cases, a rebuilding of megalithic structures taking place, after the flood during the time of Nimrod, right here. And when you look into this time period, I've mentioned the Genesis 14 war earlier. I'll zoom that part in a little more for us right here. That's an amazing study right there. In fact, I devoted an entire chapter of my book, Archon Invasion, The Rise, Fall, and Return of the Nephilim. One of the chapters is called the Genesis 14 War, because it's worth digging into. Josephus, in the Antiquities of the Jews, says that these kings had laid waste all Assyria and overthrown the offspring of the giants. So here we have a war of giants. This is epic. This is Lord of the Rings type stuff. 5 kings against 4 kings. These are giants. This was a war of offspring of giants that took place 450 years after the flood. And we see that Abraham hooks up with Mamre, Aner, and Eshcol here, these 3 guys. And, we see that Mamre is an Amorite, brother of Eshcol, brother of Aner. These were confederate with Abraham. And they get together with him, and they go after the 4 kings that beat the 5 kings. Now, again, we're talking giants beating giants. 4 armies worth of giants beat 5 armies worth of giants, and chase them in the slime pits that later became known as the Dead Sea after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where I believe there's the greatest archaeological dig of all time, find of all time, is waiting for us underneath the Dead Sea, probably in the southwestern area, I'd imagine. Because if all these giants were chasing the slime pits, and that area later became the Dead Sea, with all that bituminous and salt, they're probably well preserved, I would imagine. I mean, can you imagine digging up 5 armies worth of giants, probably well preserved? I'm telling you, I think the greatest archaeological find of all time is waiting for us there. But at any rate, 4 kings beat the 5 kings. The 4 kings end up taking Lot and his family as spoils of war. And Abraham's like, I don't think so. And he gets his buddies together to go get Lot back. And we see that in verse 17, they slaughtered Kedar-Laomer, who was the right-hand man to Amraphel, who is Nimrod. I mean, it's like killing the General Patton of that particular army. Just to kind of put things into perspective, this is what I believe they saw in Numbers 13. The Anakim, you got to love the faith of Caleb. Caleb's like, what's the problem? Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Looking at a dude like that. And these are smaller dudes, because this is another 400 years later. If you go back to the Genesis 14 war, when people are living longer and growing taller, I think we got to rethink the way we view Abraham. A lot of us have this view of Abraham as sort of this, real kind of frail old guy with a long beard, but I'm going to suggest we might start thinking of Abraham more like this, because Abraham gets 317 of his buddies together, and 318 guys go over there and they kick the butt of the 4 kings that beat the 5 kings. So Abraham's one tough dude. And the whole Old Testament starts taking on a whole a new air about it as you start factoring in the giants and strange hybrid creatures too, I would suggest to you. The Hittites were very well known for their carvings and depictions of animal-human chimera. And they are the terrors. The Hittites are the terrors. And after Abraham's wife Sarah dies, you get this text that talks about in Genesis that Abraham is negotiating with an individual named Ephron of the Hittites. Well, looking in my chart there, zooming in on the area that talks about that, Hittites are carving animal-human chimera. Here are her lion men right here, human body, lion head, and goat in human. Satyrs right here, half human, half goat. So the Hittites, they have lots of carvings of this sort of things. So they took the time to make these things. And Ephron is of the Hittites. Well, Ephron's name means fawn-like. So considering the chimeric nature of the Hittite carvings, and the Hittites are the terrors, and he's of the terrors, and he's fawn-like, could it be that Abraham was negotiating with a satyr for a burial plot for his wife? I don't know. But the text would kind of lead you to believe that that might be the case. I'll let you look it up for yourself. Is there evidence of the giants? Well, yeah. You've seen charts like this floating around on the internet. These are some documented cases of giants that have been found in the historical record. Of course, Steve Quayle has done some fantastic work in his book. This is a full-size 8.5 by 11 book, rather thick book, called Genesis 6 Giants, Master Builders of Historic and Ancient Civilizations. These guys were the builders. They're the ones building these megalithic structures out there. And you can check out that book if you want to get some really good resources for documentation of historical finds. Now, that puts things into perspective, like this stone right here, this famous picture we've seen at Baalbek, where scholars look at that and say, we have no idea how was that stone quarried, cut, and moved here. We don't have technology or the ability to move something like that today. So how in the world did they do it in the ancient world? And of course, the ancient aliens crowd would say, well, the aliens did it, the tractor beam or levitation or whatever. Well, I'm like, well, what if we just took the scriptures for what they say? Amos tells us that the giants got as tall as cedar trees and strong as the oaks. I found it interesting that in his bodybuilding days, Arnold Schwarzenegger was known as the oak. So I scaled the oak up to a 36-foot tall cedar tree size and put him to scale in this picture, and that's what you end up with. Well, if they're 36-foot tall cedar tree size, strong as the oaks, giants around, it's pretty easy to see how stones like that could have been quarried, cut, and moved. And I found this book, this quote in a book called History of Baalbek by a guy named Michael Aloof, page 41. He says, after the flood, when Nimrod reigned over Lebanon, he sent giants to rebuild the fortress of Baalbek, which was so named in honor of Baal, the god of the Moabites and worshippers of the sun. And when he was shooting the movie Conan, these are some candid shots of him with Wilt Chamberlain and Andre the Giant. and Arnold's not a short guy either. He's about 6 foot tall. But look how tiny he looks compared to those guys. So, we got to start thinking along these lines if we want to understand the megalithic structures, the ancient civilizations, and the gods of mythology. Speaking of gigantism, I'm going to try to demystify that whole thing for you. A lot of people think of giants and they're like, well, of course, it's because angels mated with women. Well, as we're seeing, no angels mated with anybody in the post-flood world, yet we still have giants. I'm going to suggest to you that it's not quite as supernatural as you may otherwise think. And I would point to this: if we're looking for science, if we're researchers, being honest with the text and honest with ourselves, looking for evidence, not stuff plucked out of thin air to justify crazy theories that we might have. This is empirical evidence right here of a very plausible way that gigantism could have happened to humans, just like it does in the animal kingdom. You could go to liger.com, and at least at the time when I did this, this was their front page, their home page. And if you look at the names of the ligers, Hercules, Zeus, Sinbad, Vulcan, they named them after the Nephilim. But now this is scientific, empirical evidence I'm about to show you. Listen to what they have to say as to why these creatures are so big.
This big guy is a liger. Yes, a liger. And trainer Doc Antle and his partner Rajani have the biggest one in the world.
This is Hercules, who is our liger boy, 900 pounds and 12 feet tall. He's a gigantic kid because he's a liger. Father lion, mother tiger, makes him...
Father is a lion, mother is a tiger.
Makes him the liger.
Hercules is skilled at, well, eating about 100 pounds of meat a day.
Everything about him seems exaggerated. They seem to live longer, they eat more. We've never seen anything happen in the ligers except bigger, stronger, faster. It's theorized that ligers are this enormous size because the inhibitor growth gene exists in the female lion and in the male tiger. So when you switch around and you get a male lion breeding with a female tiger, creating the liger, you get this gigantic size. Nothing tells it when to stop. In the wild, this enormous size wouldn't necessarily be of any advantage because it would require so much more food. Samson here can readily eat 25 pounds of food in a sitting, where an adult lion can subside on 7 to 10 pounds of food.
Helps you understand why they always refer to the land as devouring itself. I mean, if you got giants going around, yeah, they got to eat something, right? I mean, look how much those ligers eat. Now, did you catch what he said? He said the growth inhibitor gene that tells the animal when to stop growing is in the female lion and in the male tiger. So if there's a growth inhibited gene in the female lion and in the male tiger, if you've got a male lion and a female tiger, you don't have that gene. So the tigon is a male tiger with a female lion. The tigons are about the size of normal lions and tigers, but the liger it just keeps growing until it dies. It's huge. Why? Because either the gene has been switched off through the hybridization process, or it is missing through the hybridization process. Now, just think about that. Gigantism is as simple as turning off or removing a gene through hybridization. So we see that there are animal-human hybridization experiments taking place before and after the flood. So could it be through through that hybridization process that the gene is missing, or the ability for that gene to be turned off is encoded somehow? I don't know, but this just shows you an empirical, scientific, plausible explanation for gigantism, as simple as messing with one gene. You and I have a gene that told us when to stop growing. I stopped growing at 5'11" at about 15, 16 years of age. Okay, I got to the age and the gene kicked on and said, okay, Rob, stop growing. Well, if you turn that gene off and I just keep growing, then I become a giant. So it doesn't take angels to create giants, I guess is the point that I'm making here. Now, again, the earliest evidence of any civilization points to the 3000, 3500 BC time frame. According to the books of Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees, that's when the Watchers landed on Mount Hermon. It is the time of the Genesis 6:4 Nephilim. Sometime shortly thereafter, the Sumerian religion influenced Mesopotamian mythology as a whole, surviving in the mythologies and religions of the Hurarians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and other culture groups. Now, this has caused some people to question, did Moses when he wrote the Torah and the creation account and whatnot, did he just copy the Sumerian text? Some of the oldest texts that we have on the planet are like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the creation epics and stuff like that from the Sumerians. And there are some similarities, and it's caused some people who don't want to believe the Bible just say, Moses just copied the Sumerian text. I don't think that's the case. I think that for a few hundred years or so, this guy right here was given the opportunity to tell the story his way. This guy was thoroughly pagan. This is Nimrod right here. Okay, I think for about 800 years or so after the flood, this guy and others like him were able to twist and distort and tell their messed up version of history as taught to them probably by the Watchers and others. And I think finally when Moses shows up, God says, okay, Moses, why don't you come up here? Let me tell you what really happened. Ready? In the beginning. You taking this down here? Okay. In the beginning. So I think that's what happened there. Now, regarding Nimrod, we see that the whole world was of one language. We read about this in Genesis 11, and they were gathered together under his leadership in the plains of Shinar, and they decided they were going to build a city and a tower whose top might reach into heaven, which I contend, again, has nothing to do with height. I believe he's creating essentially a stargate. They had some interesting plans we'll cover in a minute. What their intentions were, it wasn't just to reach into heaven and say, hey, what's going on here? Hello. They had evil intent. And the response we see from the Lord is rather interesting because he says, nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. That's when he decides to confound their language. Well, that's really interesting. When you really, okay, let's go ahead and get into this and keep in mind what I'm about to read to you. God himself said what they are thinking and imagining to do won't be restrained from them, meaning it was at least theoretically possible. Now, I'm going to be talking from, I've talked a lot from Enoch already, but I'm going to talk about the book of Joshua. Now, there are 3 books, Enoch, Joshua, and another one I don't have depicted here, Jubilees, that I refer to as a synchronized, biblically endorsed, extra-biblical text. The reason I say that is because they tell the same story, the same chronological order of events that we see in Genesis. They are biblically endorsed because the Bible itself, canonized text, quotes from these books, makes references to things that can only be found in these books, and in some cases even mentions them directly by name, like the book of Joshua mentioned twice in Scripture. And I've put these books together with the book of Genesis and the King James and the Septuagint all in one volume, and that's the book you see right there, Genesis and the synchronized, biblically endorsed, extra biblical text that you can get on Amazon if you desire. Now, in that book, I, of course, have the full volume of Joshua in it. And Joshua talks about, it tells a story right here. It says, and the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin. And they began to build it. And whilst they were building against the Lord of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. And all these people and all the families divided themselves in 3 parts. The first said, we will ascend into heaven and fight against him. The second said, we will ascend to heaven and place our own gods there and serve them. And the third part said, we will ascend to heaven and smite him with bows and spears. And God knew all their works and all their evil thoughts, and he saw the city and the tower which they were building. And the Lord knew their thoughts, and it came to pass when they were building, they cast the arrows toward the heavens, and all the arrows fell upon them filled with blood. And when they saw them, they said to each other, surely we have slain all those that are in heaven. For this was from the Lord in order to cause them to err, and in order to destroy them from off the face of the ground. And they built the tower and the city, and they did this thing daily until many days and years were elapsed. And God said to the 70 angels who stood foremost before him, to those who were near to him, saying, come, let us descend and confuse their tongues, that one man shall not understand the language of his neighbor. And they did so unto them. And from that day following, they forgot each man his neighbor's tongue, and they could not understand to speak in one tongue. And when the builder took from the hands of his neighbor lime or stone, which he did not order, the builder would cast it away and throw it upon his neighbor, that he would die. And they did so many days, and they killed many of them in this manner. And the Lord smote the 3 divisions that were there, and he punished them according to their works and designs. Those who said, we will ascend to heaven and serve our gods, they became like apes and elephants. That's really interesting. That verse right there, because in my missionary travels, I also spent time in India, and I began to wonder, could that be where these guys came from? If you look in the pantheon of gods, I mean, I think the Hindus have the most bizarre ones of all. You know, blue characters and multi-armed characters and elephant-headed characters like Ganesha, the elephant god-man, and Hanuman, the ape god-man. I'm just saying, I don't know. But here's an ancient Hebrew text saying that one of the groups, the one that said, we will ascend and serve our gods, their intent was to put up their gods in heaven. God apparently said, well, I'll make you like your gods then. I'm gonna turn you into like apes and elephants. I don't know. That's what the text says. If I take a literal reading of that text, and if I look at the Hindus and their various pantheon of gods, they just so happen to have some that look like elephant-headed men and ape men. Incidentally, Obama carries around Hanuman, the ape-man god, in his pocket as a lucky talisman. That's another story. You can look that one up for yourself. And those who said, we will smite the heaven with arrows, the Lord killed them, one man through the hand of his neighbor. And the 3rd division of those who said, we will ascend to heaven and fight against him, the Lord scattered them throughout the earth. Those were the ones whose languages were confounded, I suppose. And those who were left amongst them, when they knew and understood the evil which was coming upon them, they forsook the building, and they also became scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And they ceased building the city and the tower. Therefore he called that place Babel, for there the Lord confounded the language of the whole earth. Behold, it was at the east of the land of Shinar. So now you've got all these people, what's left of them. I mean, a fair amount of them were killed off. Others were turned into elephants and apes, I guess, or whatever. And everybody else, you know, their languages were scattered. I mean, there's a lot of chaos going there. So all these groups of people went 70 different directions. You had 70 angels divided up into 70 different people groups, 70 different languages, go away talking about the same guy now in different languages. And that's how I believe Nimrod became known as the man of myth, particularly in Assyria, Babylon, Egyptian, and Greek. And I credit these 2 guys right here, these 2 authors, Peter Goodgame in his online book, The Giza Discovery, that you can read for free at redmoonrising.com. At least I think you still can. He used to have it up there. And Tom Horn's book, Nephilim, Stargates, and Apollyon Rising, who he did an update of that book. It's now called Zenith 2016. But they had a pretty profound impact on my thinking regarding Nimrod and how he became what I refer to as the man of many names, and some of the names that he became known by. A lot of different characters in different mythologies. Why? Because they were all worshiping this guy at one time. They're all under his leadership. He was their god for all intents and purposes, and their plan was to basically get Yahuwah out of heaven and set up their own gods, and probably, presumably, set Nimrod up as king in heaven. So God divided the languages to go around talking about this guy, and all kinds of symbols become associated with him as well as names, such as the Ankh, which represents resurrection, incidentally. The all-seeing eye. This is a bust of Sargon, I believe one of the other characters he was known by. And he lost his left eye, Nimrod did, apparently, in the ancient records. And that motif shows up a lot throughout the ancient myths of one of the father gods missing an eye. Incidentally, it's the same left eye that's on the back of your dollar bill. That's why I don't like carrying them anymore. I call them Nimrods. I don't like carrying them with me at all because I believe it is a talisman going right back to this false god. Zooming in on the timeline and that area, it shows right here the bust of Sargon missing his eye superimposed on top of the all-seeing eye in the pyramid of your dollar bill. Right beside that, I talk about shortly after Abram returns to Ur, Nimrod throws him into a fiery furnace in 1998 AM, AM being years since creation. But Yahuwah saves him. And then 2 years later, when Abram is 52, Nimrod has a dream, which is interpreted by his servant Anuki. And I wonder if Anuki might not be where the Anunnaki may go back to this guy. I don't know. Linguistically, it seems similar, but could be, could not. Who knows? Anyway, the interpretation of the dream in Joshua chapter 12, and that which he had a dream about this bird plucking out his eye, and so the interpretation is, and that which thou sawest of the river, which turned to an egg at first, and the young bird plucking out thine eye, this means nothing else but the seed of Abram, which will slay the king in latter days. So losing an eye means a death for Nimrod. And apparently, when you look in the ancient record at depictions, he lost his left eye. Joshua tells you that Esau cut off his head. So could it be that when the head hit the ground, the eye got plucked out with a rock or something? I don't know. That motif shows up over and over and over again. And then, and I contend that if you've read my Babylon Rising or seen any of my presentations on that, that Nimrod is the coming Antichrist of the last days, for a variety of reasons that I give in those presentations. If that's the case, if he is coming back, then consider Zechariah chapter 11, in a last days context. Woe to the worthless shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. Things that make you go, When you look in the ancient record, there are a lot of similarities, and people say there's nothing traces back to Nimrod, and they all want to bash Alexander Hislop and discredit him. And to be fair, he wasn't very good at annotating, from what I understand. I've never read his book. I didn't come to any of my conclusions from the two Babylons. I've never read the two Babylons. I've seen some quotes other people use from his work, but I've personally intentionally did not read it because I wanted to see if I could come to similar conclusions on my own, and I did. That Hislop says a lot of the ancient sun gods, especially, trace directly back to Nimrod, and I found it in my own independent research very similar. I came to very similar conclusions, and just look at different depictions of this guy. Like you have Gilgamesh here on the left, and apparently he's a giant. If that's a full-size lion, he's a pretty big dude there. So you got a club and a lion. You have Orion, same motif, club and a lion. You've got Baal in the same pose here as Nimrod, with the same exact pose. And you got depictions of Ninurta there. There's over and over and over again, we see depictions across different cultures regarding their gods, showing their god with a club, a raised arm, and a lot of times with a lion. And of course, we know that Yeshua is referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So I believe that there's one who has always been at war with the lion. And I'm going to say that one was and is not and yet will be Nimrod. And when you start looking in the ancient record of the ancient gods and who he could have been known as in the different pantheons, I believe that he manifests himself in the Assyrian, Babylonian, Akkadian religions as Marduk, Ninurta, and Gilgamesh. Why three different names? Well, you're dealing with different groups and different morphologies of their myths over time. Gilgamesh was really just sort of a fictional story, an allegory, many believe. It was sort of like the blockbuster movie of the day. So you have him there. And I believe he manifests in the Egyptian pantheon as Osiris. A lot of synchronicity between iconography of Nimrod and Osiris. And in the Greek pantheon, I believe he manifests as Apollo. I had a little bit of a hard time coming to this conclusion at first, but after I tracked it through Dionysus and saw similarities between Osiris and Dionysus, and other people likening them together, I came to believe that Dionysus and Apollo are sort of opposing personality types, or Apollo in the post-Hellenistic time period especially is depicted like this almost effeminate god, a god of arts and poetry and stuff. But earlier he was known as the destroyer and the giver and stayer of plagues and pestilence, which is interesting because Apollyon is named in Revelation 9:11. Right after this pestilence throughout the Bible is often associated with locusts of all these chimeric animal centaur-like creatures, animal human centaur creatures coming up out of the bottomless pit. They're described like horses with wings, face like a woman, and or teeth like a lion, and hair like a woman, and whatnot, and tails like scorpions, and they sting people and stuff. These are chimeric centaurs coming up out of the bottomless pit. Oh, by the way, it says that the Apollyon being a derivative spelling of Apollo, was the king over these chimeric centaurs. Well, if you look in the Greek mythology, Apollo is the father of Centaurus. Centaurus is the father of the centaurs. Again, look at the Bible from a mythological worldview. How would the people who would have received John's message when he wrote the book of Revelation, what was he thinking when he wrote it, and what was his Greek-speaking thinking audience? What was on their mind when he said it? They would have made all these connections. Animal, human, centaur-like creatures. A centaur is part man, part horseman. So when you read about the 200 million horseman army, it's not the Chinese, folks. It's not the Russians. Yeah, the Chinese have enough people to field a 200 million man army, sure. But go read the context of it. Horseman, centaur, father of the centaurs, Apollyon. It's all there, especially if you look at the Bible from a mythological worldview. Now, Dionysus is this like party animal, just out of control character. And so I believe it's sort of like this yin-yang sort of idea, the good and bad we all have within us. And I think eventually what was originally one character got split into two, with one retaining the party animal side, Dionysus, and the other retaining the more kind of chilled out, good guy, so to speak. So my Apollo connection to Nimrod really came through Dionysus, which was pretty tightly connected with Osiris. And so, I mean, you really have to go through all of these gods to make these connections and go through them and see what syncs up and what doesn't. And I think that that's what Hislop did initially. He must have followed a very similar path to the one that I took. And unfortunately, he didn't annotate his findings too well, from what I understand. One of the big complaints of his writings is that he didn't footnote very well. So consequently, they think he just made it up off the top of his head. And but I can tell you, I did my own research on this. I'm showing you guys some of it, just even in the depictions themselves. But I would encourage you to do your own research. I tried to annotate and footnote as best I could in Babylon Rising and in my blogs on BabylonRisingBlog.com. So you can look at some of this stuff for yourself. And, read the ancient historical commentators, the historians, what's his name, Diodorus, and some of these other guys. Read what they have to say. In fact, I got a book here at my desk called The Religions of the Ancient World by George Rawlinson. This was done in the 1800s, making similar connections. So the stuff's there. You can make the connections. And if you make all the connections that these guys, especially the sun god variety of guys, going back to Nimrod, well, then all of a sudden you know what's going on with the December 21st through 25th winter solstice deal, and why December 25th directly goes back to Nimrod. What's going on with all that, and the phallic symbols that come out of the myths, like in Osiris, the Osiris myth and the obelisk. You have this phallic motif that goes through the ancient world, eventually making its way into the idea of the Christmas tree. So that's why you've heard me make kind of crude statements about the phallus of Nimrod and the Christmas tree, but it really does all connect. And people like Clement, in the recognitions of Clement, he writes, regarding Mystery Babylon and mother of all harlots, he says, fallen angels taught men the use of magical incantations that would force demons to obey man. This became ingrained into the Egyptians, Persians, and Babylonians. Nimrod, called Ninus by the Greeks, so right there he's showing the Greeks referred to the same character as one of their gods, Ninus, was handed this knowledge, and by it caused men to go away from the worship of God and go into diverse and erratic superstitions, and they began to be governed by the signs in the stars and motions of the planets. The false religions and all that stuff, it really goes back to Nimrod and the fallen angels. And we see Solomon says, hey, you know what? What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Well, that should give us pause to think when Yeshua said in Matthew 24:37, then, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. Well, what's going on in the days of Noah? Let's sort of do a little bit of a recap here. Well, you have transhumanism, the creation of hybrids, I would say at the time of Noah's life, you don't have angel-human hybrids taking place. You do have animal-human hybridization taking place, especially if you read Joshua 4:18 and Jubilees 7:24, two confirming witnesses to show you what is being said in Genesis 6:12, where it says, all flesh had become corrupted. Became corrupted through hybridization. I believe they had advanced technology in order to do that. And that resulted in a massive increase of evil activity, causing God to wipe out the world with a flood. And in the post-flood world, with the arrival of Nimrod in the later years of Noah, parenthetically, that's what I'm talking about there, Nimrod shows up in the later years of Noah. And with him, his name means we shall rebel. There's a renewed rebellion and hostility toward God clearly going on at the Tower of Babel. Corruption of God's creation taking place once again. The development of interdimensional portals. That's what I believe the Tower of Babel was. Its top might reach into heaven. And of course, the worship of gods other than Yahuwah, and men thinking of themselves as gods. So that brings us to a discussion that will lead us into modern days. Are the gods returning? Are they going to come back? Well, in many ways, I would suggest they never left. These are, I mean, depictions right here in our own country, you know, in Nashville and New York and Washington, D.C. I mean, we've got the gods everywhere. They're all over the place, for crying out loud. And, you know, what about this variety of gods, Anunnaki and Horus, you know, bird head, human body, crossing different cultures, you know, apparently the Sumerian Babylonians saw this character, and so also did the Egyptians. You know, two different cultures depicting bird head, human body, animal-human hybrids, you know. And I'm going to suggest that this stuff exists in the myths because there was something there originally. You know, legends and things of that nature and myths have a kernel in truth. They go back to something. Now think about this. When George Lucas created Star Wars, he said that one of his stated objectives in the creation of the Star Wars series was to create a modern mythology. And if you were like me growing up in the 70s, you had all these little characters that you played around with, didn't you? And if you're like me, I boxed these up and put them away as my retirement. It'll probably be worth something someday. You know, I think every one of these characters depicted here in this picture. The question would be, in the year 2525, would people dig up my collection someday and think this was proof aliens were here? You know, they say, look, you know, look at all these people. You know, if you know, the toys somehow manage, this plastic lives and survives, you know, whatever's up ahead, and for however long we have left on this planet, if people in the future were to find all our Star Wars toys and you know, Transformers and all that stuff, what would they think? Well, they would think, you know, apparently we were playing with this stuff, making this stuff, because we had seen this stuff. The only reason these action figures exist is because we all saw Star Wars, and a guy named George Lucas created a mythology with these characters. So if we're all playing around with these characters based on something we saw, is it unreasonable to believe that in the days of Noah and following, the ancient world were depicting these characters because they existed? I think it's reasonable to make that assumption. I think it's a reasonable assumption. Well, I mean, are they going to come back? Are we going to see a return of these animal-human chimera? You know what? I'm going to say, yeah, I'm pretty sure we are. Now, you know, this guy, this is Photoshop, okay? This guy doesn't really exist. But, you know, you have to understand that DARPA, the Defense Agency's research projects agency there, they are actively trying to create the super soldier, you know, the advanced war soldier, by blending species. I mean, imagine if you could give a soldier eyes like an eagle, or the speed of a cheetah, you know, or the radar of a bat, or the sonar of a dolphin. You know, give a whole new meaning to Navy SEALs. You know, they are actively blending species, trying to create the advanced super soldier. You know, this little mouse here with the ear growing on his back is real. That's a real picture. That really happened. You know, this is an artist representation. This is a movie scene. But we are seeing it in pop culture. We are seeing it in science journals. They are blending species today. It's happening. And what does that mean for us? Does that mean in the not too distant future we may see things like this depicted in the movie Splice? Well, if people like Nick Bostrom have their way, we certainly will. Nick Bostrom is the director of the Future of Humanity Institute. They have an institute within Oxford University dedicated to our future, folks. And this is a chart taken from his website talking about what their goals are with this whole blending of species thing. You see right here, this pink circle. This is the sensory modalities available to us, what we can see, hear, taste, touch, smell as humans. Pretty small, huh? He says, if you compare that with what the animals are able to, they can see in different frequencies, hear in different frequencies, have other abilities that we don't have. That's this gray area right here. So, well, what if we started blending their attributes into ours? We might, we might have this big circle right here accessible to us. That's what could be accessible to transhumans. And if we really get creative and keep building upon that idea, maybe even blending ourselves with technology, we might end up with this really big circle or oval thing here that would be accessible to post-humans in the post-human era, right? They're trying to create Wolverine. And what kid doesn't want to be Wolverine, right? What kid doesn't want to be Spider-Man? We're being brainwashed on a daily basis, to be a super soldier. Captain America, how cool would that be? We're seeing it all the time, aren't we? Yeah. Well, there's a great deception that's coming, folks. Yeshua said that it's going to be so great that even the elect could be deceived by it. And I believe the great deception actually goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 3 again, Genesis 3, 4, and 5, where the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Well, what we see here are essentially three promises of the serpent: a promise of immortality, a promise of illumination, your eyes shall be open, you'll have greater wisdom and understanding, and that they will become like the gods. Keep those three bullet points in your head, in this order, okay? Immortality, greater wisdom and understanding, and being like the gods. Keep those three in mind as you watch this next clip by the transhumanists who are actively working in laboratories and universities around the world trying to become like the gods.
There's more computing capacity in a grain of sand that's been nanoteched, right? There's more computing capacity in that grain of sand than our human being brain's capacity by a factor of, I don't know, billions, right? So imagine a young woman, she's just given birth, and then she needs to make the decision. Is she going to have her baby modified? Is she going to turn that baby into a cyborg, or effectively an artellect? So say she decides to do that. So this, hypothetically, this grain of sand, in a sense, that's been nanoteched, is inserted into the human brain, that baby's brain, and it integrates itself into the brain. So that baby, in effect, is no longer human. Because, think about it. The capacity of that grain of sand is billions of times what the human brain can do. Right? So for, 1/1000th of its capacity, of its time, is it doing human things. And the other 99.9999999% of the time, it's doing artellecty type things. So that woman, in a sense, has killed her baby. Killed in the sense the baby is no longer human. It's effectively an artellect. It's an artellect in human disguise.
When we start modifying our brains with technology, then it does change us from the word go. Even just feeding in one electrode with maybe an extra sense, an ultrasonic sense, which we know is quite possible, then it starts to give you abilities and you believe you can do things outside the normal realms of humanity. So your values, your morals start to change immediately. You become a cyborg.
What I'm really interested in is to try to understand the bigger picture for humanity, our place in the world, and what might lie in store for our species in the future. Particularly the way we might use technologies to enhance ourselves, or to go beyond what we currently think of as our human nature, whether it might be by radically extending the human lifespan through solving the problem of aging, or increasing our intellectual capacities, improving our memory, or taking control of our own emotional states. I think that we are right now in a transitional phase where before the end of this century we will either have gone extinct, or we will have most likely taken the step to become what you might call transhumans or posthumans, or just very enhanced humans that have reached their full potential.
Because progress is so rapid, I mean, there's going to be more progress in the next 10 years than there were in the previous, 20 or 30, right? So the rate of progress is speeding up. It itself is accelerating. So there's going to be hugely more change, technological change in the 21st century than in the 20th. Far more. So all these weird things that sound like science fiction to most people today will probably be realities in a time, in a fewer number of decades than we had imagined.
I can't see any way that it will not happen. This is progress.
Human beings already, theorists, have done the math. They've got the modelling of how to build baby universes. So if that's possible in theory, with human brains doing the thinking, what could an intellect do? Could it actually build universes? Could it actually manipulate whatever exists to create new universes? Is that possible? Now, if it can do that, then by definition, it's a god, right? It's a creator. Can you sort of sense a kind of, almost like a religious awe, almost? We could build gods if we wanted to.
We could build gods if we wanted to. Okay, wrap your head around this, guys, because this is happening. These guys they're doing this stuff, all right? I mean, is this a vision of things to come? We've seen it in the movies, and we've seen, various depictions, Photoshop and whatnot. If these guys are able to do what they're trying to do and continue to do it, I believe this stuff, we're going to see this stuff. And it's not just the blending of animals with humans. As you've seen, it also includes technology. And regarding this whole idea of blending with the machines to become like the Borg and the whole Ray Kurzweil's Singularity and stuff like that, listen to what they're planning and what they're thinking on the technological front.
To transfer your mind to a computer, this seems to be the ultimate dream of many scientists. To liberate us from our old body that is becoming obsolete in this technological world.
So in a way, mind uploading is a shortcut around artificial intelligence that will allow us to have machines with human minds.
We will be able to inject a certain number of nanobots into our bodies, where they will locate our brain cells and copy their functioning. With no effort, we will get a hardware copy of our consciousness that will then send a software copy to a computer, where more copies can be made, or where our consciousness will be allowed to merge with other souls and software programs.
We are going to get to the Terminator scenario. That's what I see. Intelligent machines calling the shots. Humans, some subservient slaves is the best, maybe on farms if we're lucky and so on. Looking at how we are ourselves now, I don't think the future is good. If you are a human after the singularity, forget it. There are certainly some humans that are against having implants, that are against becoming a cyborg and having extra abilities. It's difficult to see much of a positive future existence for them. That clearly the world is going to be dominated either by intelligent machines or cyborgs, or a combination. That's where the future's going. And as a cyborg, if a human came to see me and it starts making silly noises, a bit like a cow does now, if a cow comes to me and says moo, 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 I'm not going to say, yeah, that's a great idea, I'm going to do what you tell me. So it will be with a human. They'll come in and start making these silly noises that we call speech and human language and so on. And these trivial noises, I'm not going to do those silly things. Why should I? This creature's absolutely stupid in comparison to me.
And as the technology becomes vastly superior to what we are, then the small proportion that's still human gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's just utterly negligible. There's more computing capacity in a little grain of sugar when it's nanotech, 1 bit per atom and flipping back and forth in femtoseconds. There's more computing capacity in that grain of sand than our human brain by a factor of, I don't know, billions or something. So these machines, if we, humanity, if we decide to build them, we're building gods. Consider the analogy of the way we, as human beings, we look towards ants or mosquitoes as pests, We kill them and we don't give a damn because we feel we're so superior to them. They are so inferior to us. So who is to say that an intellect, which then becomes trillions of times above human capacities, may look upon us in the same kind of way? We could never be sure. As a brain builder myself, am I prepared to risk the extinction of the human species for the sake of building an intellect? Because that's what it comes down to. Yep.
We are fast approaching an event unprecedented in our history, a tipping point known as a technological singularity. When this happens, the world will change forever. I think we should embrace the singularity. You see, fundamentally, I'm an optimist. Optimists make history, not pessimists. So I'm going to come up with a solution that some people may find very surprising. Today, I want to address one urgent question as computer power races ahead. What happens when the machines become smarter than us? You saw what happened in the Terminator. You saw what happened in Blade Runner. What are we going to do about it? Well, I'm going to give you a radical new solution, and that is merge with them. First, this is the human brain, the most complex object in our sector of the galaxy. 100 billion neurons that can be scanned by MRI, neuron for neuron. This means we can digitize all the information we accumulate during our lives and upload it into a giant mother computer, a vast database of all human knowledge, a resource we could share by downloading programs we want to give us instant knowledge. So when the singularity arrives, we will be in control. By merging with machines, we will enter a new age of superhuman existence. That in the post-human era, we become Homo superior. We become a new species. We're talking about humanity becoming like the gods. What do you think? And how many want to sign up?
We're talking about humanity becoming like the gods. And how many want to sign up? Yeah, me. I want to be a Borg. That's what we're talking about. You want to become a Borg or a Terminator. And, you listen to these guys talk, and they're going to do this, folks, if Yeshua delays his return. And unfortunately for all the pre-tribbers out there, I think he is going to delay for a while. I don't believe we're getting out of here anytime soon. My personal belief is I think we have at least 19 more years to go. I don't have time to get into why I believe that in this presentation. So you can check out my 322 Tetrads in the Time of Jacob's Trouble videos on YouTube. You can check that out. I believe we got at least 19 more years to go. And if you go to 2045.com, 2045.com, and read what the 2045 Strategic Social Initiative is all about, and the scientists of the world getting together, talking like these guys are talking, and working on things, their stated objective is to achieve immortality, we would say parenthetically, apart from God, by the year 2045. Guys, that's just around the corner from here. We're going into 2015 right now, 30 years from now. Okay? And they are making rapid advancements towards their goal. So, I mean, it helps us understand when we start looking through the scriptures and we see stuff like Matthew 24:21-22. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Or we see in Luke 21:25-26, a kind of a parallel passage there. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. What's going on here? We've seen it in the movies, more and more so. We're seeing it in the movies. All these movies about, alien invasions or things coming up out of, Pacific Rim, or, scientific experiments gone crazy, or Terminators. The days ahead are going to be freaky. They're going to be scary. I hope I am wrong. Frankly, I hope there is a pre-trib rapture. I can't find biblical evidence for it, and that's coming from a guy who believed it for about 40 years. I don't anymore, because there's flat out simply no evidence for it. And you can check out our Quest for Truth. I think it's 17 and 18, where the episodes that Doug Hamp and I did on it, if I remember right. But at any rate, he said that our days are going to be like the days of Noah. We are only just taking the first steps into those days. We're not there yet. We are taking the beginning. We're in the phase that the days of Noah, when God said in Genesis 6:3, he said, my spirit will no longer dwell with man, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. A lot of people want to take that scripture and say, well, that means we got 120 jubilees. Well, it's an interesting coincidence that 120 times 50-year time period is 6,000 years. Yeah, that's cool. There's nothing in Genesis 6 about jubilees. You're making that up. It's cool. It's an interesting coincidence, not in the text. People think that that's a cap on human lifespan because Moses died at 120. Well, there are people today that have gone 126, 130. So if you're going to take a hard and fast rule on that, then people are violating the scripture by living past 120. And what's David doing saying that our days are only 70 years, 80 if by strength, if we're supposed to have 120 years? It's not talking about that. Man's been flesh since God created us, or at least since we took a bite in the garden. Some think that we lost our light suit and became flesh after they took a bite. Could be. At any rate, man's been flesh since the garden. So what's he talking about there? I believe what he's saying is, look, I created you to be a house for myself. Paul says that we are now what? The temple of who? The Holy Ghost. The Holy Spirit lives within us, right? Genesis, we're told that we are created in the image and likeness of God. But when we start blending ourselves with animals and turning ourselves into something that is not like the image of God anymore, then what are we doing? We are doing, as Doug Hamp's title of his book says, corrupting the image. I believe when we corrupt the image, we end up possibly opening up forbidden gates, as Tom and Nita Horn said in the title of their book, that could bring about the corruption of all flesh, leading God's spirit to leave us because you've messed up his house. I created you to be like me, he said. I created you in my likeness as a house for myself. But if you corrupt that house, I can't dwell in it anymore. That's what he's saying. Stop blending yourself with animals and everything else, corrupting your house. And the result of doing that, when his spirit left, what was the end result? The end result was they had only evil continually in their heart and mind. We are only now in the beginning of that process, folks, where we're hearing bits and pieces in science journals and whatnot of scientists blending species together. 150, 140 animal-human chimeras created in the laboratory. I think it was 2011, 2012, whenever it was, not too long ago. And we're going to see a lot more of it. If these Nick Bostrom guys and Hugo de Aris and Michio Kaku guys have their way, and they are actively doing these things, guys. So I think we're in that same spot that the people in the pre-flood world were in Genesis 6:3, where God is issuing a warning saying, hey, knock it off. If you don't knock it off, things going to get really bad, and then no flesh is going to be saved except those days be shortened. God's not this temper tantrum guy up there that doesn't, like people, swearing and bonking each other over the head with clubs, even though he doesn't like that. I'm sure he doesn't like that, but he doesn't wipe out the world because of those things. He wipes out the world because we corrupt it. We mess it up. We change it from what he established it to be. And the end result of that is nothing but violence and evil. So he's giving us warning after warning after warning to knock it off. Don't do that. Don't go that way. I'm going to give you 120 years because on the path you're on, by that time, it's going to be too late. And that's what happened. Noah became a preacher of righteousness, right? Noah preached repentance for 120 years. How do you repent of being born Polish or French or Spanish or whatever your nationality is? You can't repent of that. So it wasn't about preaching to Nephilim, who could not possibly repent for being born of the byproduct of angels and women. How can a Nephilim repent of being born of an angel and a woman? You can't. So that doesn't make any sense. He would have been wasting his breath preaching to people who can't repent for their nationality, their heritage. But you can repent of blending yourselves with technology and species and corrupting your image. You can repent of that. That's what I believe he did for 120 years, the latter days of Methuselah leading up to the flood. And Joshua says they didn't start building the ark till 5 years before the flood. So he preached for 115 years, and in 5 years he said, well, okay, too late. I guess we better build an ark. So that's what happened. We're in the stage where the warning is being issued, in my opinion. And it's going to get a lot worse. You guys look at the news today, you think the news is bad, forget it. It's not even remotely close to what was going on in the days of Noah. We're not there yet. So, for a lot of reasons, I believe we have more time left. And as for me and my house, I'm going to try to get as much on God's page as possible, because what I see with the world doing, it's not good. It is not good, and it's not going to end well for them. I do believe there will be a hiding variety of protection for those who are obedient, who put the blood on the door, so to speak. I understand that the blood is on the door of my heart. I get it. But the call is to come out of Babylon so you don't partake of her plagues. But if you decide, I think I like it in Babylon, I think it's cool here. Well, you know what? You're going to get the plagues that are not meant for you. Anyway, I digress. But this promise, you shall be like the gods, continues to this day. We see in looking in the history that pharaohs thought they were gods, right? The Caesars thought they were gods. Emperors thought they were gods. Kings thought they were gods. What about presidents? Yep. Our presidents think they're gods too. All you have to do is take a trip to Washington, D.C. You're going to find that place loaded with gods. These are just Zeus and another one depicted on the train station. The whole roof of the train station is lined with these characters. I'm telling you guys, when it comes to Washington, D.C., you will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy, to quote Obi-Wan Kenobi. I don't know who made this picture, but I love it. It shows, Ben, Luke, and C-3PO looking out over, and R2-D2 looking out over the mall at Washington, D.C., looking toward the Capitol building. That is one evil place, guys. I woke up a few years ago with the name Ningirsu stuck in my head. It was like, Ningirsu. I'm like, what is Ningirsu? It was like ringing in my ears, when I woke up and first woke up. And so I thought, okay, well, I guess that's my assignment for today. So I started looking into Ningirsu. Well, I come to find out, Ningirsu basically is represented on the front steps of our Capitol building right here by Mars and Ceres. Well, what's it all about? Well, I was able to trace Ningirsu back to being an earlier representation of somebody named Ninurta. And Ninurta traces directly back to Nimrod. So really, Ningirsu is Nimrod. But in the earlier phases, Nimrod, Ninurta, Ningirsu was known as the god of war and agriculture. And just like Dionysus and Apollo was split into different personalities and different characters, these earlier representations were later split into war and agriculture were once in one deity, like Baal. Baal was a god of war and agriculture. That's why you saw the depiction of Baal earlier with his one arm raised in a club and the other one holding a stick, war and agriculture. Well, they put the masculine attribute of war into the god the Romans called Mars, or Ares to the Greek, and the agriculture went to an entity, a feminine entity known as Ceres. Well, Ningirsu, Ninurta, Nimrod is divided up as war and agriculture deities, okay, gods, little g's, thou shalt have no other gods before us. You want to know why our nation has been at war every year, basically, since the Revolutionary War? It's because who are we serving? You turn over your dollar bill, in God we trust, right? in our Judeo-Christian way of reckoning, we always capitalize the G, right? And all the pagan gods are little g. Look on the back of your dollar bill or anywhere we see "In God We Trust." It's all in caps. The whole thing's caps. I think that's a convenient way of hiding what God. We have to get a lot more intentional about which God are we talking about here? Are we talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Are we talking about Ningirsu, Ninurta, Nimrod divided up into Mars and Ceres? Or are we talking about Zeus? Which God are we trusting in? I'll tell you what, if you go to Washington, D.C., you're not going to find the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob represented there. You're going to find all these guys. And on your way into the Capitol building, where all our policy and everything's made, you're going to walk right by and give homage to the God of war, which is why they're sacrificing all of our sons and daughters and friends and family on this altar of this false war called the War on Terror. War on terror. Think about that. War is terror. How do you wage terror to get rid of terror? It's not a war against a people group or a nation. It's a war against an idea conjured up in a Luciferian's mind. People who worship these guys, who worship Nimrod. We've got to wake up, folks. When your favorite congressman or whatever is, mentions God, call him on it. Which God? Are we talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or what? We have to get a lot more intentional and wake up. You walk into the Capitol Dome, you look up, and you're looking into this wonderful painting up there called the Apotheosis of George Washington, and we're led to believe that we live in a Christian-founded country, right? Well, yeah, sure, Puritans and Pilgrims, yeah, okay, I get it. But yeah, when it gets to the Founding Fathers, nah, not so much. These guys were not Christians, folks. They were deists. They were Luciferians. They were Illuminists, following Francis Bacon's plan for the New Atlantis. And all of their depictions and layouts of Washington, D.C. as a pentagram and all of their gods and pantheon of, it all proves it. If we have supposedly a Christian-founded country and our George Washington, the father of our nation, supposedly a Christian, what's he doing being depicted here as Zeus, surrounded by a whole bunch of other ones like Neptune, and there's Ceres again, and Vulcan, and Minerva, and Columbia, Ishtar, Isis, Liberty, and Mercury, the messenger of the gods, with our founding fathers at his feet taking notes in our so-called Christian-founded country. We've been lied to, folks. In this place called District of Columbia. Who's Columbia? Ishtar, Isis, Semiramis, Starbucks, as Freeman Fly would point out. Pagan deities. Our whole country is being run by a district to a pagan god. And all of our government buildings prove it. And when you look at this picture of George Washington, and the painting, again, is called Apotheosis. Apotheosis, it basically means the elevation of a person to the rank of a god. It's the deification of human beings. He's depicted as which god? Zeus. Want proof? There you go. After he died, this was a government-commissioned statue that was created of him. How do we know it's Zeus? Well, because he's in the same exact pose as one of the ancient depictions of Zeus in the Temple of Zeus. Furthermore, on either side of his throne there, we see Hercules and Apollo. Hercules and Apollo, both sons of Zeus. George, deified as Zeus. Do presidents think they're gods? Apparently they do, going right back to our first one. Oh, by the way, he's also in the same pose as Baphomet, the occult symbol right there, Baphomet, demon goat head god. And the Apotheosis of George Washington painting was done in 1865. And when I went there and I asked the lady about it, she said, yeah, that was, because I said, isn't that the year Abraham Lincoln died? She said, yeah, in fact, he was the first president to undergo the lying in state ceremony. Well, what do you know? Later, he's deified also. And pictures started showing up of the Apotheosis of Abraham Lincoln with depictions of the Mithra cap and everything right here, going back to Nimrod. And you got, this is a god seated on a throne in a temple. Don't believe me? Right above his head, it says, in this temple. What are temples for? Gods. Presidents. Gods. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun, including our current president. You ever notice how, especially in his early days, almost every photo op, every picture we saw of the guy, there's something behind his head giving him this halo effect, like, oh, the Messiah is here. Obama, And while he's touring the country making his campaign, this guy is touring the country as well, Anubis, the god of the underworld. And he was like fascinated by the altar of Zeus. This is the altar of Zeus from Pergamum in the Berlin Museum. And so much so that he liked it that he had his acceptance speech in Denver, Colorado, in front of a replica of the seat of Satan, the altar of Zeus. Later, he goes to Egypt, and they start making up banners and plates and stuff called Obama, the new Tutankhamun of the world. Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten. Akhenaten, and you got to check out Freeman Fly's stuff on Akhenaten. He's got some wild stuff, especially related to Obama and whatnot on all that. But Akhenaten basically instituted a monotheistic religion in the land of Egypt. King Tut came along and undid everything his father did and brought back the worship of the old gods. Is it just a coincidence that Obama, he becomes our president? He also ends up taking that little trip to go get a Nobel Peace Prize for what? I have no clue. And this thing shows up in the night sky. The Norway Spiral. Is this guy the guy? I don't believe he's the Antichrist. I know a lot of people out there do. I'm not one of them. But let me put it this way. If he is, he's a host body that's awaiting a possession. I could see that as a possibility. Because there's a lot of weird and wackiness around this guy for sure. But I tend to think that he's more like playing the role of John the Baptist type character, preparing the way. And is he preparing the way for the old gods that go back to Nimrod, who I believe is the Antichrist? I don't know. Could be. Again, we're just speculating here. But what is this thing in the sky there? Don't tell me that's a failed missile. Especially when you look into ancient cultures and depictions like this, the Nazca lines in Peru, and you happen to see, a little spiral here that looks like the approach end of a runway. The ancient alien theorists all think that the Nazca lines and stuff that these are all ancient alien runways. Are they? I don't know. Could be, but I think we're definitely being primed for the idea anyway, really going all the way back to War of the Worlds, right? Orson Welles doing his radio thing, which I think was really just a psyop. I think the whole thing was designed to just see how would people respond to this deal. What's their reaction going to be? And if you missed the beginning of the radio broadcast where they told you this is just a radio drama, and you came home from work, turned on your radio, and I missed that disclaimer, it was done like a regular radio broadcast news story. And so, people flipped out, and the way to describe the aliens, the ships and whatnot, were like they were described like the water towers. So they're hearing all this stuff. They look out the window and they flip out, seeing the water tower out there. Of course, it's been there for 50 years, but this is mind control. They're listening. This is trauma-based mind control. They're listening to something they think is real. They're getting scared about it. This is a Hegelian dialectic. They're causing a problem. They have the solution. Blah blah blah. People are freaking out. In fact, there are all these reports that came out afterwards revealing, fake radio war stirs terror throughout the United States. And we see in Luke 21:10 and 11, it says, "Then he continued by saying to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes, and in various places plagues and famines, and there will be terrors and great wonders or great signs from heaven." Sharon K. Gilbert wrote something really interesting along these lines. She was looking at the word for terrors there, and she wrote in a blog, she said, "The Greek word translated terrors is a curious word indeed. In fact, it quite surprised me when I looked it up. It is phobitron. According to Strong's G5400, phobitron implies that which causes terror or fright. It comes from the root word phobio, from which we derive our English word phobia. Phobio is that which causes fear, or it can be something that instills great respect or reverence. It can instill awe or amazement, or simply compel us to flee for our lives. Phobitron only appears in the Bible once, just once. Luke is the only one whom the Holy Spirit inspired to use this curious word. One small word that may imply many horrendous events yet to come. The rise of machines, a singularity of sorts. Think of it the next time you watch the movie Terminator. Phobotron, you know, if I wanted to be very speculative, then I might also mention flying machines as a source of terror, and I would connect this site with the phrase that follows it, great signs from heaven. And of course, she's speculating here, but I think reasonably so. Could it be a reference to something like this, terrors in the sky? You know, we've all seen the movies, right? And TV show, you know, V and Independence Day, right? And the whole idea of a mile-wide spaceship parked over a city used to be crazy talk back in the day. You know, it was always alien abductions. You know, that guy you could floss his teeth with rope out there going, "Yeah, I got abducted by aliens. He took me up in the spaceship. Yeah, he did." You know, it's like, yeah, they traveled billions of light years and they picked you. You know, it used to be always the crazy whack jobs out in the middle of nowhere that were, you know, why didn't they pick the Albert Einsteins or the, Stephen Hawkings of the world? I don't know, but you know, they apparently like the weirdos. But I mean, it used to be crazy talk to think about a spaceship parked over cities, right? Until, well, a few years ago, a mile-wide spaceship apparently parked over Stephenville, Texas. Articles and you know, news stations, ABC News, covering it right here, January 18th, 2008. And then you start seeing things like this. September 27th, 2010, the United Nations appointing an ambassador to aliens. Literally appointing somebody for the United Nations to be a representative of Earth in the event the aliens show up. And of course, the Vatican decided to pipe in too and say, yeah, the Pope's astronomer would baptize them if they needed it. We're living in some weird times, folks. You know, maybe these guys got some of it right. Some of these characters may be coming back. Now, again, I don't believe that they're from other planets. I think we're talking about interdimensional beings. I think we're talking about fallen angels activity. But we can't just toss out this whole UFO phenomena. As L.A. Marzulli is fond of saying, UFOs are real and burgeoning and not going away. It's true. When I put together my Mount Herman Roswell DVD, I put an 8-minute montage of UFO sightings up to that time that I could find on YouTube from mainstream news reports. More and more, we're seeing UFO activity increasing. I believe they are the chariots of the gods, both good and bad angels. In fact, you read Ezekiel, I mean, yeah, these are good ones, but it has some, you know, if you read it, they're like a UFO showing up. Speaking of, I was on my way to the post office last year, one particular day. I was driving, and now I'm a filmmaker, okay? I work with cameras. A lot of this is lens flare. And if you just showed me this picture, I would say this right here, this circle right here in the lower left of the sun, would be a lens flare also. The problem is I saw this with my naked eye and I took this picture and I know that that is not lens flare. In fact, to my eye, it didn't look like that. It was a bright silver ball just sitting there in the sky. And I was stuck at a red light just staring at the thing. I'm looking at it and it's just hanging there. I'm like, what in the world is that? So I got my phone out and I took this picture. And I continued to watch it for a little while, and I got to, and this is a plane, actually, this thing, when I first saw it, it was right here. It had moved over to here. And right after I saw it move, this plane right here started leaving a chemtrail. And so this is it right here. I followed it. I'm getting ready to turn into the post office. And I'm at the post office here. There's a plane going off, leaving his chemtrail where it used to be. This thing's right here, and I followed it, and then you see the chemtrail plane. Okay? I watched this thing move. It was a bright silver ball. What in the world? I don't know what it was, but it was moving. It wasn't just blowing around like a balloon or something. It had intentional movement. What was it? Well, it's an unidentified flying object. That's what it was. When we look at pictures like this, we've all seen this picture, and this is actually a very disturbing picture when you really break it down. But with the pineal gland strategically located in the crotch of God, who is surrounded by all these women, and it's like, what in the world? And his arm reaching right through the frontal lobe, the third eye, you know. But anyway, this is supposedly Adam and God, you know, famous painting right here. Well, folks, this was deliberate when they made the movie E.T., extraterrestrial. And what's interesting is in the Bible, and you know, we see that Jesus said he is the Alpha and the Omega. Well, that's Greek. You know, we're reading in English the Greek word alpha and omega. But the Hebrew is Aleph and Tav. And if you were to pronounce the Aleph and Tav, the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, it would be pronounced Et. Et. You know, I think we are being primed for something like this, folks. E.T., our gods, our creators are coming back. The theory of evolution has become thoroughly bankrupt, folks, completely and totally bankrupt. So what are they talking about now? The new pet theory that everybody's talking about is panspermia. What's panspermia? Well, ancient gods seeded this planet with the seeds of life, and then Darwinian evolution was able to take place, you know, after they scientifically tampered with existing molecules and whatnot on this planet. They seeded it. They made it happen. The Anunnaki. In fact, if you go back and watch the movie Prometheus, the beginning of it depicts that whole sequence in accordance with the Sumerian texts. Okay, so we're being primed for this new. Now that, you know, evolution has run its course and has done a good job of destroying the creation model, it has created a new paradigm for them to bring in what they probably wanted to do all along, is bring in a different paradigm of other gods other than Yahuwah being our creators, and all the movies and everything else priming us for the potential return of these beings. And, you know, of course, we're doing our own little ventures out into space. This is a book by my friend S. Douglas Woodward, and both Richard C. Hoagland and S. Douglas Woodward say that NASA's decision makers are intentionally ritualistic in their planning. Woodward goes on to point out that the, quote, only gods of interest are Osiris, Isis, and Horus, who are indeed the primary characters in the Egyptian story of resurrection. And he has an interesting observation by Jay Wiedner using the acronym of NASA, pointing out Nephthys, who in the Egyptian pantheon was a sister of Isis. Ausur is one of the Egyptian forms of the name Osiris. Set, Osiris's brother, and Aset, one of the Egyptian forms of the name Isis. Of course, it's no secret that NASA was founded by former Nazis. More than 1,600 Nazis escaped the judgment they deserved and found refuge in America. A group of 104 German rocket scientists, including Werner von Braun, Ludwig Roth, and Arthur Rudolph, are pictured here at Fort Bliss, Texas in 1946. Many had worked to develop the V-2 rocket at Peenemünde, Germany, and came to the United States after World War II, subsequently working on various rockets, including the Explorer 1 space rocket and the Saturn V rocket at NASA. Now, all you have to do is go back and look at what was going on in World War II with the Nazis and their obsession with the Aryan nation, you know, creating an Aryan nation, bringing back the worship of the Nordic gods. They were all about the Nephilim. Well, so is NASA. I mean, just look at what they named the programs, for crying out loud, right? Starting with Mercury, messenger of the gods. You know, in Roman mythology, Mercury, or also known as Hermes to the Greeks, was, of course, he's the messenger of God, but he was the son of Maya. Now, who was Maya? Well, she was the daughter of the Titan Atlas and one of the 7 sisters known as the Pleiades. And his father is Jupiter, or Zeus to the Greeks. As Hermes, he was the god of transitions and boundaries, moving freely between worlds of the mortal and the divine. He was also what's called the psychopomp conductor of souls to the underworld, where, of course, Osiris rules. Hermes, Mercury, has a strong connection to Apollo in the sense that he was a half-brother, and also that he carried the caduceus, you know, the double serpent entwined staff we see, like the medical symbol, which was given to him by Apollo. The caduceus is a recognized symbol of commerce and negotiation, 2 realms in which balanced exchange and reciprocity are equally recognized as ideals. So what exactly was going to be exchanged in space with the Mercury program? Well, on February 20th, 1962, the Atlas rocket carried John Glenn into orbit aboard the Friendship 7. This was the flight that ushered in the new era of space travel. But think of the symbolism being employed here, folks. Atlas, right, was the father of Mercury. Atlas, the Atlas rocket, which looks like a big giant penis, shot up into space with 1 passenger seed on board. Thus, John Glenn, one of the 7 Mercury astronauts, was the ambassador of Earth, sent up in friendship with the number 7, which of course many would associate the number 7 with the number of God. So was he to play the role of messenger of the gods? You know, bringing back something, sending up something, you know, envoy? And of course, John Glenn's a Freemason and was a member of the Demole International, the Masonic Youth Organization. So nothing would surprise me when it comes to any of that stuff. Okay, then we go on to the Gemini Project. The Gemini program was the intermediate program, you know, between Mercury and the Apollo programs. In mythology, the Gemini were the twin brothers Castor and Pollux. Their mother was Leda, and once again, their father was, ding, 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 Zeus. In some accounts, however, Pollux was regarded as the son of Zeus, while Castor was the son of immortal Tyndareus. One mortal, the other immortal. It was also a common belief that one would live among the gods while the other was among the dead. Again, we see this duality dealing with pagan deities in the other underworld. This is, of course, also reflected in the Masonic beliefs concerning Osiris in the underworld and his reincarnation as Horus in the upper world, or to put it in Nimrod terms, Nimrod and Tammuz. The Dioscuri, as they're sometimes called, were regarded as helpers of mankind and patrons of travelers. Sailors often invoked them to seek favorable winds. It seems therefore rather fitting that as NASA pushed forward with the goal of going to the moon, that they would need favorable winds from yet more children of Zeus, the god not only of the Greeks, but clearly of the United States of America as well. The Gemini astronauts flew into space atop the Titan II rocket. Here again, we see a direct tie to the first generation Nephilim, the Titans of mythology, who were the product of the union of angels mating with humans. Perhaps it was a fitting name for this stage of the program, as one of their primary mission objectives was to practice and perfect the docking, or let's say mating process of the Gemini spaceship with the Agena target vehicle. So here we see the all too familiar symbolism of the phallus and the womb taking place. Then, of course, we come to the Apollo program. The Apollo astronauts travel atop the Saturn V rocket. Saturn, of course, known to the Greeks as Kronos, was the first Titan god of the Capitol, the original king of the gods during the Golden Age before his son Zeus overthrew him and took over. Zeus, as we know, was the father of Apollo, according to the Greek myths. Apollo 11 is probably the most famous of all the Apollo missions. It was the one that supposedly landed men on the moon for the first time. Now, people give me a hard time for that, but, you know, saying that, I'm just going to say I remain open, but I am extremely skeptical of the official story. I do believe we've been to the moon, but I do not believe we went there the way we were told and shown in 1969. I just have not seen enough evidence to convince me that what was shown on July, whatever, 20th, 1969 is legitimate. So maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I got my tinfoil hat on, but whatever the case may be, even if it wasn't real, or even if it was real, it was thoroughly Luciferian through and through. Okay. This is the most famous Apollo mission, Apollo 11. The men who flew that mission were Neil Armstrong commanding, Michael Collins as the command module pilot, and Edwin Buzz Aldrin as the lunar module pilot. Buzz Aldrin was a Scottish Rite Mason, and though hard to vet, some say that Armstrong was too. I've seen conflicting stories on that. Now, many doubt this claim, but at the very least, there seems to be a strong consensus that he was a Mason. What intrigues me most about the Apollo 11 mission was this was the one that accomplished the lofty goal of landing a man on the moon, and all of the symbolism in this particular mission points right back to Nimrod stuff. Revelation 9:11, right? We see the name of the beast, Apollyon. He's the Antichrist. Now, there are some really interesting correlations between the numbers 9 and 11, Scripture, and this particular mission of Apollo. For instance, some have linked the 9, if you don't know what the 9 is, do a Google on the 9, to the Aeneid of Egypt. The Aeneid were the 9 great gods of the Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Nephthys, who is the sister of Isis, Ausur, another name for Osiris, Set, his brother, and Aset, a derivative name for Isis. The latter for, of course, as I mentioned before, is the acronym for NASA. If this link is indeed a solid one, there are ancient legends that speak of the Zep Tepi, the first time. And that was the age that the Egyptians referred to as a time when the sky gods came down to earth, raising the land from the water. They came in flying boats and brought wisdom to mankind through the bloodlines of the pharaohs. Gods in flying boats? NASA? Apollo spaceship? Maybe it's all just a coincidence. The eagle. The eagle, Manly P. Hall says that when you see an eagle with a point on the back of its head, like on the back of your dollar bill and on the Great Seal, he said, nah, that's not, we put a fast one on you. That's a stylized, conventionalized phoenix. Well, the phoenix goes back to the Egyptian Benu. The Benu was the soul bird of Osiris. And so you've got this, okay, let me kind of pull it all together. If Ishtar, Semiramis, Isis are one and the same, Columbia, and Osiris and Apollo and Nimrod are one and the same, then what you have is Columbia orbiting above and the eagle carrying Apollo landing on the moon. I mean, it's like all going right directly back to this whole Osiris, Horus, Isis, Nimrod, Semiramis, Tammuz, all of it's there. When we look at the space shuttle program, this is a great quote from William Cooper. He talks about all the names, missions, landing sites, and events in the Apollo space program echo the occult metaphors, rituals, and symbology of the Illuminati's secret religion. Another revelation to those who understand the symbolic language of the Illuminati is the hidden meaning of the names of the space shuttles. Quote, a Columbian enterprise to endeavor for the discovery of Atlantis, and all challengers shall be destroyed. Maybe it's just a coincidence. The new program, after they retired the space shuttle program, is called the Orion program. You ever notice how it's always going back to this Nimrod thing? Apollo, Orion, right? Of course, the Orion program, this is new enough. You go watch videos about the Orion program. You'll see, I've seen several videos from NASA showing one of the holdups that they're having in development of this process is figuring out how to accurately and appropriately shield the spaceship and the astronauts from the intense radiation of space. Wait a minute. You told us that a bunch of astronauts went to the moon in a tin can with jumpsuits on. Why don't you just put them in jumpsuits and throw them in a tin can and throw them back up there again? Why are they having so much difficulty shielding the spaceship so the computers don't get all jacked up and making sure the astronauts are properly protected from the intense radiation of space, like, oh, the Van Allen belt and what's beyond it? You know, and this is one of the big questions I have, Michael. They're telegraphing something to me, in my opinion. You know, I'm like, well, if you're having this much trouble figuring out how to get through radiation, they obviously didn't do it in the 60s and 70s, because here we are in 2014 and they haven't figured out how to do it. Orion will be able to travel to the moon, and they're saying to Mars or an asteroid, you know, so they want to go further out. So maybe you could say, well, they're going to be exposed longer, but they were still out there for a long period of time, guys. You know, it doesn't take much radiation to jack you up. Orion also could carry crews or supplies to the space station. Orion will launch on top of a huge rocket called the Heavy Lift Launch Vehicle. It will take Orion farther into space than people have been before. Orion will use energy from the sun to get power from it while in space. Sounds cool. Sounds interesting. Then there's this, the OSIRIS-REx program. Wow. In 2016, NASA intends to launch the OSIRIS-REx. Okay, Rex means king. Osiris, of course, is who we're talking about here. King Osiris. They're going to launch the King Osiris, a probe designed to explore and take samples from, and I'm not making this up, folks, the Bennu asteroid. So King Osiris, OSIRIS-REx, supposedly stands for, now this is what they say the acronym stands for, Origins Spectral Interpretation, Resource Identification, Security, and Regolith Explorer. Do you get the sense that they're just really trying to like force an acronym here just for the sake of honoring their god? Good grief. OSIRIS-REx is scheduled to arrive at the Bennu. Now remember, the Bennu is the soul bird of Osiris. That is the phoenix, which represents resurrection. They're supposed to arrive at the Bennu in 2018. And the plan is to analyze the asteroid and in 2019 to take samples from it to bring back to Earth. In the online promo video, they reveal hopes of recovering DNA, which they will return to Earth, according to their mission, by 2023. At that time, while hovering above the Earth, the space probe will eject the space seed in a tiny return vehicle, sending it here for further study. You can't make this stuff up, folks. It's unbelievable. Our government, our space program, they are all honoring, and I would submit, finding ways to try to bring back their gods. And I'm going to conclude here. This has gone way longer than I anticipated it would, but I hope you guys are enjoying it. There's a video I saw on the History Channel regarding Zeus. And, you know, I've talked about all this stuff and the potential return of the gods and stuff, but let's put it all in perspective here. There is only one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he's not afraid of any of these other guys. You know, his call is for us to stay away from them, not get involved with them, not make up excuses for doing things that really have more to do with them than Jesus. Hint, hint. But in the end, he gets the victory. Now, in this video, it was actually on the History Channel. They talked about the long rule of Zeus. And at the time when I captured this, I couldn't capture the video for some reason. So I just put stills to the audio. But here's what they had to say regarding Zeus and a certain individual many of us know that came from Nazareth.
This is the story of Zeus, Greek mythology's supreme commander. To us, it's a myth, but to the ancients, it was reality. Some Greeks believed Zeus was the one true God, and that nature's worst catastrophes were a sign of his wrath. This is the myth of Zeus. In the myth, Zeus has held onto power in the face of strong opposition. But there is one more challenger he didn't count on: Jesus Christ. In the 1st century AD, his message would take the world by storm and dethrone Greece's dominant god.
In antiquity, there was no more powerful force than Zeus, except for one.
How cool is that? On the History Channel, Zeus reigned supreme for 3,000 years until a seemingly insignificant man from Nazareth showed up named Jesus, who literally toppled his regime. Of course, we know he's not insignificant. He is the son of the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yeshua, HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, our Savior, right? And when we look in the scriptures regarding Jesus and regarding his Father, we see that he says in John 4:23 through 24, "But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him." He's looking for people who are willing to worship him in spirit and in truth, because God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. That means you can't be mixing the lie with the truth. Yes, Jesus was born, but he was not born on December 25th. Everybody knows it. Even the Christians out there who do it, they defend it. They start off by saying, yeah, we know that he wasn't born on December 25th, but, well, that word "but" just invalidated everything you said before that. And what's going to follow is some lame excuse for why you're going to do it anyway. I'm putting this out there for your consideration, folks. We need to be careful who we worship and how we do it. If we take this scripture literally, then this is important. Why is it so important, folks? Because the title of this presentation is what? Mythology and the Coming Great Deception. I just spent the last 3 hours talking about the myths of the ancient world and all the false gods of antiquity, right? In fact, let me just go ahead. This presentation is over with, so let me go ahead and put my mug back on the screen here. Hang on just a second. Hi, how you doing? All right, guys. you know, I'm passionate about this stuff because the scriptures say that there is a deception that's coming that'll be so great that even the elect could be deceived by it. And I'm going to suggest that the elect is already deceived by it. You know, love, Paul says, love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth, not the dolled up lies. So, you know, I know I get kind of crazy on Facebook and stuff like that, and I just want to say, look, I apologize to anybody out there if I've offended you, but look, how could I spend this much time doing this much research, all the research that went into this for years, and not want to just push that as far away from me as possible? You know, I'm going to tell you, don't believe a thing I say. Go look it up for yourself. Because if I just say it to you, then it's just Rob's crazy opinion. Don't believe me. Check everything that you've heard for the last 3 hours. Go look it up for yourself. Because then you're the only person you're going to have to get mad at is yourself. And you might go through a grieving process. I did. When you realize that, man, just about everything we've been taught is a lie. And, you know, we're listening to politicians who say, yeah, I'm a Christian, or better yet, saying I've been born again, not realizing that there's a skull and bone society where they do sexual rituals in coffins and come up out of it in the skull and bone society, and they say, congratulations, brother, you've been born again, ... into the skull and bone society. They're using our lingo against us. When somebody says, yeah, I believe in God, say, okay, really cool. Which God? I'm sorry for that bling bling. What is that? Hang on a second. I got to try to shut that down. I don't know what it is. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. What's going on throughout the whole presentation. When they say, hey, I believe in God, ask them which God? Which God are you talking about? Oh, I believe in Christ. Okay. Which Christ? Which one are you talking about? I'm celebrating Christ the King, born this day. My Christ was not born on December 25th. So which king that was anointed are you singing about? Like I said, that last slide, just be careful, folks. I think that God is calling us to a higher standard in these last days. I think that in times past, he may have winked at our ignorance. But you're not ignorant anymore. You know, you made the mistake of listening to this broadcast. So you can't say I didn't know because I just told you. And before, when I didn't know, you know, I believed that I don't believe that we're going to be judged for things we didn't know. I did all the Christmas and Easter stuff myself. But then after I spent all the time studying and looking into this stuff and realizing just how thoroughly infiltrated we are in everything, in our churches, in our governments, in our schools, in our homes, with Nimrod boners. Yes, I said boner. Okay. Yeah, I'm being crude because it is crude. You're sticking a middle finger up to God in your house. You know, the Israelites, when they, in Exodus 32, they set up the golden calf, you know, the Aleph is ox head, first letter. And it's associated a lot of times with God. So it was reasonable for them to think, well, here, let's go ahead and make a calf, an ox, you know. And they said, this is the God that brought us out of Egypt. Well, they saw the fiery pillar and smoke and the Red Sea parting and the plagues and all that. So they know that there was an entity that led them through all that. And that entity, you know, was up in the mountain with Moses, and Moses isn't coming back. So what did they do? They thought, well, let's make a representation of him. We'll make a golden calf. And it tells you, they said, this is the God that delivered us from Egypt. And then they said, well, we're going to throw a party to the Lord, capital L-O-R-D. Go look it up in a concordance. That capital L-O-R-D is the English translator's way of throwing out the name of God, putting a generic word in there. The Yod-He-Vav-He is under that. Lord, by the way, if the real English, if we were to take English from Hebrew, the Hebrew word used for Lord is Baal. And I just showed you who Baal is. So they said that we're going to have a party to Yahuwah, Yod-He-Vav-He. So when 3,000 of them are being wiped out because God didn't like that too much, I can imagine them all saying, but you know my heart, we meant that it was you. We were doing this to you. We were singing to you. My heart was to honor you. You took us out of Egypt. You know my heart. Well, if you go read the story, it didn't really work. 3,000 people got killed. We are to worship him in spirit and in truth. So much the more as we see these last days approaching, guys. That's why I'm passionate about it. Because I'm seeing people defend Nimrod everywhere I turn around. It's being put in our face in our government. It's being put in our face in the schools. And now it's in our churches. You know, Baptists pride themselves in being, hardcore word-based people. I grew up in the Baptist environment. They weren't much on the gifts of the Spirit and stuff, but they knew their word. They could quote you book, chapter, verse, left and right. But the Baptists made Christmas illegal, all right, in the 1800s. And you wouldn't know it now. It's all over the place. So, yeah, Christmas is over. But you know what? I'm not going to shut up about it. Because this stuff honors a different king. It honors a different Christ. Yes, Yeshua was born, and we should celebrate his birth. It's a wonderful thing that he was born and came into this world. Angels sang about it. You know, wise men showed up about 1.5 years later to bring gifts to him. Shepherds rejoiced. Yeah, it's a great thing. So if we want to celebrate his birth, why not do it when he was, actually born? Like the day when he was born. I was born June 26th. If you go around telling everybody my birthday is March 2nd, I'm going to call you a liar. And if you give everybody else presents instead of me on my birthday, I'll be like, hey, what's the deal? It's not rocket science here, folks. And Ishtar Day, same thing. He was born during the appointed times, the Moedim. He died during the appointed times, during the Moedim. He was buried during the appointed times. He rose on the appointed times. The Holy Spirit came down on Pentecost at the appointed time. He's coming back on the appointed time, and I believe he's coming back at the Feast of Trumpets, which I happen to believe is his birthday, based on Revelation 12, 1-5, and the stellar alignment, the perfect fulfillment of the stellar alignment of September 11th, 3 BC. 80 minutes of time in human history. 80 minutes. Perfect alignment, exact fulfillment of Revelation 12, 1-5. And if you look at the moon at her feet, this says the 12 stars at her head, woman clothed with the sun, moon at her feet. The moon at her feet is a new moon. It's not a full moon. So I don't believe he was born in tabernacles. He tabernacled among us because he came in human flesh. And he was here during the Feast of Tabernacles, to be fair, because he was, I believe, born about 14, 15 days prior on the Feast of Trumpets. He's coming back on the Feast of Trumpets. The Feast of Trumpets is also the time when kings are coronated, and they blow trumpets, lots of them. So how fitting that the Son of God, right, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, would enter this world to the sound of trumpets, both heavenly trumpets, I believe, as well as human shofars, people blowing, not human shofars, but people blowing shofars. A fitting arrival for the Christ, who is the King, who is the Lord of Lords, right? So we have been given, if you want to celebrate holidays, let's celebrate the ones that are truly holy days and the ones that truly honor the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and his one and only begotten son, Yeshua, the Messiah. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's been a lot longer, about an hour longer than I intended it to go, but anyway, this has been an updated version of my talk, Mythology and the Coming Great Deception. And it also brings the conference, the Yahuwah conference, to a close. So thank you guys for watching this live. If you guys are watching this on the archive, thank you very much. And good night, everybody.